The wind did not simply blow across the high plains of the territory. It scoured them. It came down from the northern peaks with the weight of winter behind it, stripping the moisture from the soil and the hope from a man's bones. The landscape was a vast, bruising expanse of gray sage and brown earth, broken only by the jagged spine of the mountains to the west and the lonely, leaning shape of Eli Mercer's ranch house. It was a house built by a man who expected nothing good to return to him. The timber was rough-hewn and grayed by years of sun and sleet. The roof sagged slightly on the eastern side, and the windows were narrow, like eyes narrowed against a glare. There were no flower boxes, no rocking chairs on the porch, nothing to suggest comfort or welcome. It was a shelter, nothing more. Eli Mercer moved through the early morning grayness with the economy of a man who had no energy to waste. He was 40 years old, though the sun and the wind had carved lines into his face that suggested 50. He wore a coat made of buffalo hide that had seen better decades, and his hat was pulled low to shield his eyes from the biting grit carried on the breeze. His routine was a liturgy of survival. First, the water. The creek was half a mile down the slope, and the pump near the barn had seized up 3 days ago. Eli took 2 buckets, their handles wrapped in burlap to keep the metal from biting into his gloved hands, and walked the path he had worn into the earth. The creek edges were crusted with white ice. He had to use the heel of his boot to break the surface before he could dip the buckets. Next, the fence, the barbed wire, strung tight between cedar posts, was the only thing separating his meager herd from the open range and the drift. He walked the line, checking for breaks. He found a post leaning precariously where the frost had heaved the ground. He spent an hour digging around the base, his breath puffing in white clouds, his hands aching even through the leather gloves as he packed stones and dirt to shore it up. Then, the livestock. He had a mare in the barn with a stone bruise on her left foreleg. Eli spoke to her as he entered the dim, hay-scented warmth of the stable. He did not use sweet words. He spoke in a low rumble, a sound more than a sentence, letting the animal know he was there. He lifted the hoof, inspecting the swelling, and applied a poultice of bran and vinegar he had mixed over the stove. He lived alone. He ate alone. He slept alone. There was a reason for the silence. Up on the ridge, overlooking the valley, was a small enclosure surrounded by a low wall of river stones. Inside lay a single grave, marked by a wooden cross that Eli whitened with lime every spring. It was a small grave, not big enough for a man. Eli never went up there unless he had to clear the brush, but he felt the weight of it pressing down on the roof of his house every night. The town, 20 miles to the east, knew about the grave. They knew about the accusation that had stained Eli's name 7 years ago, a story of blood and a dispute over water rights that had ended with a dead man and a jury that could not prove Eli guilty but refused to call him innocent. The neighbors treated him like a bad story that refused to end. They tipped their hats if they passed him on the road, but they did not stop. It was late afternoon when the rhythm of his isolation broke. Eli was chopping wood near the side of the house, the axe splitting the seasoned pine with a sharp crack that echoed off the barn. He heard the sound of wheels before he saw them. It was not a wagon, but the heavy, rattling approach of a stagecoach. He lowered the axe, frowning. The stage road was 5 miles south. No driver worth his salt brought a coach up the rocky trace to the Mercer boundary unless he was lost or paid well. The weather was turning. The sky to the north had bruised to a deep, sickly purple, and the wind had shifted, bringing the first stinging pellets of sleet. The coach crested the rise and ground to a halt at the edge of his property line, near the cattle gate. Eli walked toward it, the axe still in his hand. Though he held it loose at his side, he saw the driver, a man named Holloway, bundled in a greatcoat, looking anxious. Holloway did not wait for Eli to reach the gate. He hopped down, unstrapped a massive, battered trunk from the rear boot, and heaved it onto the frozen ground with a grunt of exertion. "Holloway!" Eli shouted, the wind snatching the name from his mouth. "What is this business?" Holloway did not answer immediately. He turned back to the coach door and opened it. "End of the line, ma'am," the driver called out. "This is the Mercer place." I am not taking the horses any closer to that wash in this weather. A figure emerged from the dark interior of the coach. Eli stopped walking. He stood 10 yards away, staring. The woman who stepped down onto the hard earth was unlike any woman Eli had ever seen. She was tall, not simply tall for a woman, but tall for a man. She had to stoop significantly to clear the door frame, and when she straightened, she rose up like a spruce tree. She was broad through the shoulders, her frame solid and imposing. She wore a simple gray traveling dress that looked threadbare and a wool coat that was too thin for the Wyoming winter. Holloway jumped back up to his seat, gathering the reins with frantic haste. "Wait," Eli barked. "You cannot leave a person here. The storm is coming." "She paid for the Mercer Ranch," Holloway yelled back, not looking Eli in the eye. "Driver's discretion on the final mile. I smell snow. Mercer, I am gone." With a crack of the whip, the team lunged forward. The coach rattled in a wide arc, kicking up dust and dry snow, and rumbled back the way it had come. Eli stood alone with a stranger. The sleet was coming down harder now, clicking against the brim of his hat. The woman turned to face him. She was shivering. Her face was pale, her features strong and plain, with wide cheekbones and eyes the color of the sleet falling around them. She looked at Eli, then down at the trunk, then back at him. She clutched a reticule bag to her chest with hands that looked red and raw. "Are you Mr. Mercer?" she asked. Her voice was trembling, the words vibrating with the cold. "I am," Eli said. He did not move closer. "Who are you, and why did that fool dump you at my fence?" She fumbled with her bag, her large fingers clumsy with the cold, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it out to him. "I am Ingrid Larson," she said. "The letter said to come. It said I was to be the bride." Eli stared at her. The wind whipped her skirts around her ankles. She stood nearly 6.5 feet tall. He estimated. He was a man of average height, and he would have to look up to meet her eyes. "Bride," Eli repeated flatly. "Yes." He took the letter from her shaking hand. The paper was damp. He unfolded it. It was a standard correspondence, written in a hand that looked vaguely familiar but not his own. It promised marriage, a home, and safety to Miss Ingrid Larson. In exchange for domestic partnership and companionship, it was signed Eli Mercer. "I did not write this," Eli said. He looked up at her. "I did not send for a bride. I did not send for anyone." The woman's face, already pale, went the color of old ash. She swayed slightly, as if the wind were finally winning a battle against her size. "But," she stammered, "I paid my passage. I sold everything. The agent in Chicago said—" "The agent in Chicago took your money and sent you to the middle of nowhere," Eli said, his voice hard. He looked at the signature again. It was a forgery, but a good one. It looked like the way his brother, Thomas, used to sign documents before the fever took him 3 years ago. Or it looked like the work of someone who had studied the deed records in town. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered. The fight seemed to drain out of her shoulders. She looked at the darkening sky, then at the desolate house. "He said this was my place." She began to shake violently. It was not just a shiver. It was a rattling of her bones. Her teeth clicked together audibly. Eli looked at her thin coat. She was soaked through. The sleet was turning to wet snow, sticking to her hair and shoulders. "We cannot stand here arguing," Eli said. "You are freezing." He walked over to the trunk. It was heavy, packed with everything she owned. Likely. He grabbed the leather handle and dragged it toward the gate. "Walk," he ordered. "Get to the house. Move your legs or the blood will stop." She obeyed, stumbling after him. Her gait was long but uncoordinated, her boots slipping on the icy mud. They made it to the porch just as the sky opened up and the snow began to fall in sheets. Eli kicked the door open and shoved the trunk inside. He ushered her in and slammed the door against the wind. The sudden silence of the cabin was jarring. The only sound was the crackle of the fire in the cast-iron stove and the ragged breathing of the woman. The cabin was one large room, divided by furniture, a bed in the corner, a table, the stove, a couple of chairs. It was clean, but sparse. Ginny, she had called herself Ingrid, but the name in his head was already shortening, stood in the middle of the room. Water dripped from the hem of her dress, forming a dark puddle on the floorboards. She was shaking so hard she could not unclench her hands from her bag. Eli looked at her. Her lips were blue. Her skin had a waxy, translucent look that he recognized from men who had been out on the range too long in a blizzard. "You need to get warm," Eli said. He moved to the stove, opening the grate to stoke the fire. "Get close to the heat." She took a step and stumbled. Her legs were numb. She caught herself on the back of a chair, the wood creaking under her weight. I cannot feel my feet," she said. Her speech was slurring. Eli turned to face her. "Your clothes are wet. They are sucking the heat right out of you. You need to get them off. Now." She looked at him, her eyes wide with panic. The color rose in her cheeks, a stark contrast to the deathly pallor of her skin. She looked around the single room. There was no partition, no curtain, no other room to retreat to. She was a woman who had clearly learned to shrink, to hide, to make herself small despite her size. And now she was trapped in a box with a strange man, being told to strip. "Where?" she asked. Her voice was a croak of misery. "Where should I undress?" Eli looked at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, the ingrained shame of a woman who had likely been stared at her entire life. But he also saw the blue tint of her fingernails and the way her body was convulsing. He did not have time for softness. Softness killed people out here. "Right in front of me," Eli said. The words hung in the air, blunt and heavy. Ginny flinched as if he had struck her. Eli realized how it sounded. He felt a hot flush of shame crawl up his own neck, tightening his jaw. He was a rough man, but he was not a predatory one. He saw the fear spike in her eyes, the way she clutched the collar of her coat. "Because the fire is here," Eli added, his voice raspy. "And if you go over there in the corner, you will freeze before you get dry. I am not looking for a show. Lady, I am trying to keep you from dying on my floor." He turned his back on her sharply, facing the log wall. He stared at the chinking between the timbers. "Do it," he commanded. "Get them off. Wrap yourself in the blanket on the chair." For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind howling outside and the pop of the wood in the stove. Then he heard the wet, heavy sound of wool hitting the floor, the rustle of petticoats, the intake of sharp breath. Eli stared at the wall. He counted the knots in the wood. 1, 2, 3. He squeezed his eyes shut. The smallness of the room felt suffocating. The air was charged with a strange, terrified intimacy. He could hear the slide of wet fabric against skin. He could hear her teeth chattering. He felt a profound sense of intrusion, and yet a strange, undeniable humanity. Two people, stripped of pretense by the cold, doing the only thing that made sense. I am covered," she said. Her voice was small. Eli turned around. She was sitting in the wooden chair by the stove, huddled under his rough wool blanket. Her bare feet were propped on the fender of the stove. Her wet clothes lay in a sodden pile on the floor. Her hair, dark blonde and heavy, had come loose from its pins and hung in damp ropes around her face. She looked at the floor, refusing to meet his eyes. Eli exhaled, a long breath through his nose. He walked to the trunk at the foot of his bed and pulled out a spare flannel shirt and a pair of wool socks. He tossed them onto her lap. "Put those on when you are dry enough," he said. He moved to the small kitchen area, pumping water into a pot and setting it on the stove. He found a jar of beef broth and spooned some in. "Drink this when it is hot," he said. "Do not gulp it. Sip it." He busied himself with the lamp, trimming the wick, doing anything to avoid looking at the mountain of a woman huddled in his chair. He kept his distance, moving around the perimeter of the room like a man trying not to want anything, trying not to acknowledge the sudden, overwhelming presence of another living soul in his dead house. When the broth was ready, he handed her the mug. Her hands were still shaking, but less so. She wrapped her long fingers around the tin cup, the heat seeping into her skin. "Thank you," she said softly. Eli leaned against the table, crossing his arms. Now, tell me the truth. Who sent you?" Ginny took a sip of the broth. She looked stronger now that the shivering had subsided. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I answered an advertisement in the Chicago Tribune," she said. "It was specific. It asked for a woman used to hard work, who desired a quiet life away from the city. It said height and appearance were no object." She looked down at her hands. "That part matters. Usually, people stare." "I noticed," Eli said. "I worked in a show," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. P.T. Barnum's traveling circuit for a time, then a smaller manager named Braddock. They called me the Amazon Queen, or the Giantess of the North. I stood on a box and let people look at me, let them measure my hands. She shuddered. And it wasn't from the cold. Braddock. He thought he owned me. He said I had debts. I ran away when I saw the advertisement. I used the last of my savings to get here. I thought... She looked up at him, her eyes wet. "I thought a rancher in Wyoming might want a wife who could work, and wouldn't care if she couldn't fit in a normal doorway." Eli looked at her. He saw the strength in her shoulders, the calluses on her hands. She was built for this land, even if she didn't know it yet. "My brother Thomas is dead," Eli said. "He has been dead 3 years. But he used to talk about finding someone. Maybe he placed an ad a long time ago and it got reprinted. Or maybe..." He trailed off. He thought of Silas Whitmore, the cattle baron who owned half the valley and wanted the other half. Whitmore had been trying to buy Eli out for years. A mail-order bride arriving at a bachelor's ranch. A woman who stood out, who would draw attention and ridicule. That sounded like the kind of cruel joke Whitmore's foreman would enjoy, or a trap. If Eli turned her out, the town would call him a monster. If he kept her, they would call him a sinner. "Maybe someone is playing a game with us," Eli said. "I cannot go back," Ginny said, panic rising in her voice again. "The roads are blocked, and I have no money." Eli looked at the window. The snow was piling up on the sill. It was going to be a bad one. "You can stay," Eli said. She let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Until the roads open," he added quickly. "You take the bed. I will make a pallet on the floor. When the pass clears in the spring, we will go into town and sort this out. I will help you find work or passage to somewhere else." "Thank you," she said again. "Do not thank me," Eli muttered. "You have not seen the neighbors yet." The storm lasted 2 days. When it broke, the world was white and brutal. The sun came out, blindingly bright, reflecting off the drifts that had buried the fences. The first sign of the town's judgment arrived 3 days later. Eli was in the barn, trying to clear the ice from the main door. Ginny, she had told him to call her that, was outside. She had insisted on helping. She was wearing his spare coat, the sleeves barely reaching her wrists, and a pair of his old boots stuffed with rags to make them fit. A rider came down the road. It was the Miller boy, a teenager from the next spread over. He was riding a sorrel gelding, looking for strays. He slowed his horse as he neared the house. He saw Ginny first. She was standing near the woodpile, lifting a feed sack. It was a 100-pound sack of oats. Eli usually had to drag it or hoist it with a grunt. Ginny bent her knees, grabbed the corners, and lifted it to her shoulder in one smooth motion. She turned, and the boy saw her full height, framed against the dazzling snow. The boy's eyes went wide. His mouth fell open. He looked from her to the house, terror dawning on his face. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He wheeled his horse around, kicking its flanks, and bolted back toward the road as if he had seen a monster from a nursery tale. Ginny watched him go. She slowly lowered the sack to the ground. She didn't say anything, but Eli saw the way her shoulders slumped. "Ignore him," Eli said, coming out of the barn. "Boy has no sense. He looked at me like I was a bear on its hind legs." Ginny said, "He looked at you like a boy who has never seen a woman do a man's work." Eli corrected, though he knew she was right. Over the next week, Ginny proved that the giant girl from the show was no invalid. She had hands that were rough from scrubbing and lifting. She saw a break in the corral fence that Eli had missed and fixed it with wire and pliers before he could ask. One afternoon, the young colt, the one Eli had been doctoring, got spooked by a sliding sheet of snow from the roof. It reared in the paddock, thrashing against the rails, its eyes rolling white. Eli ran for the gate, but Jenny was closer. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She stepped into the paddock, moving slow and low. She reached up, her height an asset now, and caught the colt's halter. She didn't yank. She just held firm, a solid anchor against the animal's panic. She murmured something low in a language Eli didn't know, Norwegian. Maybe. The colt trembled, then dropped its head, blowing air against her chest. Eli watched from the fence. He felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was relief, sharp and sudden. He wasn't alone. If he got kicked, if he fell sick, there was someone here who could hold the line. The thought terrified him. He had spent 7 years convincing himself he didn't need anyone. Need was a weakness. Need gave people leverage. He became clipped with her. "Don't spoil the horse," he snapped, walking past her. "He needs to learn respect, not cuddling." Jenny pulled her hand back, her face closing down. "Yes, Mr. Mercer." The nights were the hardest. The cabin was small. They moved around each other like satellites in a tight orbit, careful not to touch. Eli slept on a pile of buffalo robes and blankets near the door. He listened to her breathing in his bed. It was a torture he hadn't anticipated. 10 days after her arrival, a visitor came who did not run away. Deputy Cal Harlan rode up on a sturdy bay. Harlan was a man who smiled too much with his mouth and never with his eyes. He wore a tin star on a coat that looked too expensive for a deputy's pay. He tied his horse and walked up to the porch where Eli was oiling a harness. Ginny was inside, baking bread. The smell of yeast wafted out the door. "Morning, Eli," Harlan said, leaning against the post. "Cal," Eli said, not looking up. "Heard you had company," Harlan said. He craned his neck, trying to see through the window. "Miller's kid says you got a giant living up here. Says she lifted a wagon with one hand. She is a guest," Eli said. "And the Miller kid is a liar." "Guest, huh?" Harlan chuckled. "That what we are calling it? Silas Whitmore was asking about you. He is concerned. Eli, moral concern. You understand? An unmarried woman, unusual appearance, living up here with a bachelor." "Tell Whitmore to mind his own cattle," Eli said, wiping his hands on a rag. "He says he has old rights to the water on this section," Harlan said, his voice dropping the playful tone. "He says if there was a scandal, say, a vagrancy charge, or public indecency, it might be easier for the county to review those land deeds." The door opened. Jenny stepped out. She had to duck under the lintel. She stood next to Eli, towering over the deputy. She held a basket of eggs she had gathered earlier. Harlan stared. His eyes raked over her, from her boots to the top of her head. It wasn't fear in his eyes. It was the look of a man seeing a prize heifer, or evidence. "Mrs. Larson," Eli said, his voice hard. "This is Deputy Harlan. He was just leaving." Jenny looked at the deputy. She stood tall, refusing to hunch. "Good day, Deputy." Harlan tipped his hat slowly. "Ma'am, that is a lot of woman you have there. Eli, be a shame if she caused you trouble." He walked back to his horse, mounted, and rode off without looking back. Eli watched him go. His stomach churned. The trap was closing. Whitmore knew she was here. That night, the weather turned again. The wind shrieked around the eaves, tearing at the loose shingles. Around midnight, a drip started. Then another. The roof over the corner where Eli's pallet lay began to leak, icy water dripping steadily onto his blankets. He sat up, cursing softly. The fire was dying down. The room was freezing. "Eli?" Jenny's voice came from the darkness of the bed. "Roof's leaking," he grunted. "Go back to sleep." "You cannot sleep in a puddle," she said. She was right. The leak was spreading. The only dry spot left on the floor was the narrow strip between the stove and the bed. Eli dragged his wet blankets aside. He grabbed the dry buffalo robe. "I will sit by the stove," he said. "There is room," Jenny said. Her voice was hesitant. "The bed, it is wide enough, if we stay on the edges." Eli froze. "It is freezing." "Eli," she said, "please, I do not want you to get sick on my account." He hesitated for a long time. The cold was biting through his shirt. "All right," he said, "top to tail. You stay on your side." He lay down on the far edge of the mattress, stiff as a board, fully clothed. He pulled the robe over him. He could feel the warmth of her body radiating through the layers of blankets. He could hear her breathing, slow and steady. It was the first time in 7 years he had shared a bed with another human being. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, hunting for a way in. But inside, under the leaking roof, in the dark silence, there was a separate blanket, a careful distance, and a new kind of safety that frightened him more than the storm. He closed his eyes and listened to the rhythm of her breath, wondering how long he could keep the world from tearing this fragile piece apart. The light that entered the cabin the next morning was not the soft gold of a sunrise, but the hard, blinding white of a world erased. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt heavy, pressing against the timber walls of the house. Eli Mercer woke with a start. His hand went instantly to the Colt Navy revolver resting on the floor beside his buffalo robe, a reflex honed by years of sleeping with one eye open. But the cabin was quiet. The fire in the stove had been banked and fed. The air was warm. He sat up, the stiff muscles of his back protesting the hard floor. The bed where Ginny had slept was empty. The quilt was folded with military precision at the foot of the mattress. Eli frowned. He pulled on his boots and stood, grabbing his coat. He opened the door and squinted against the glare. Ginny was already out there. She was near the barn, wielding a grain shovel that looked like a toy in her hands. The snow had drifted 4 feet high against the stable doors, sealing the animals inside. She was digging with a rhythmic, punishing intensity, heaving heavy loads of wet, packed snow over her shoulder. Her breath plumed in the freezing air like smoke from a locomotive. She did not look like a woman waiting to be rescued. She looked like someone who believed that labor was the rent you paid for the air you breathed. Eli felt a sharp spike of irritation. It rose up in his throat, hot and acrid. He was used to doing everything himself. He was used to the crushing weight of the ranch being his burden alone. Seeing her there, doing his work without asking, without complaining, felt like a theft. It felt like she was proving he wasn't necessary. But beneath the irritation, there was something else, a quiet, terrified gratitude that he refused to name. He marched out into the snow, the crust breaking under his boots. "You will freeze your lungs breathing like that," Eli called out, his voice gruff. Ginny stopped mid-swing. She turned, her face flushed red from exertion and cold. She was wearing his spare coat again, the buttons straining across her chest, and she had wrapped a wool scarf around her head. "The horses need to eat," she said simply. "I could hear them kicking the stalls." "I know what they need," Eli snapped, taking the shovel from her hand. "Go inside. Make coffee. I will finish this." She hesitated, her blue eyes searching his face. She didn't argue. She just nodded, wiped her nose with the back of her glove, and trudged back toward the house. Eli watched her go. He gripped the shovel handle where her hands had warmed the wood. He worked furiously, throwing the snow with more force than was needed, trying to bury the feeling that for the first time in 7 years, he wasn't fighting the winter entirely on his own. By mid-morning, the reality of their situation set in. The drifts had buried the fence lines. The landscape was a seamless sheet of white, hiding landmarks and hazards alike. "We are missing stock," Eli said, standing by the fire and drinking the coffee Ginny had brewed. It was strong and bitter, just the way he liked it. "I counted the herd in the lower pasture before the storm. I am short 10 head. They could be huddled in the brush in the canyon," Ginny suggested. She was drying dishes, her movements careful in the small space. "Or dead," Eli said, "or halfway to the territory line." He set the cup down. "I am riding out to look. You stay here." "I am coming with you," Ginny said. Eli turned. "The snow is belly deep on a horse out there. It is not a Sunday trot." "I can ride," she said. Her voice had that same steel in it he had heard when she lifted the feed sack. "And 4 eyes are better than 2. If the cattle are down, you will need help getting them up." Eli wanted to say no. He wanted to keep her inside, where the world couldn't see her, where she couldn't get hurt. But he looked at her hands. Large, capable, resting on the back of a chair, and knew he was being a fool. He needed the help. They saddled the horses in silence. Eli gave her the mare, a steady animal with a soft mouth. He took the roan gelding. The land was unforgiving. The wind had scrubbed the ridges bare of snow, exposing the frozen black earth. But in the draws, the drifts were treacherous. They rode single file, the horses snorting and plunging. The sky above was the color of a gun barrel, flat and gray. They found 6 of the steers huddled in a thicket of scrub oak 2 miles south. They were alive, but shivering. Eli and Ginny worked to drive them back toward the cleared patch near the barn. It was hard, ugly work. The cattle were stupid with cold, refusing to move. At one point, a steer broke away, heading for a steep ravine masked by a cornice of snow. "Turn him!" Eli shouted. The sound cracked through the frozen air like a whip. Ginny was closest. She spurred the mare, cutting off the steer's angle. But as she did, the steer bawled loudly, and Eli yelled again, waving his hat to spook the animal back. At the sound of Eli's raised voice, Ginny flinched violently. It wasn't a startle. It was a collapse. She hunched her shoulders, ducking her head as if expecting a blow. She pulled back on the reins so hard the mare reared slightly. "Ginny!" Eli yelled, thinking she was losing her seat. She froze. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the horse's mane, her breathing coming in shallow, ragged gasps. She looked small, despite her size. She looked like a child waiting for the belt. Eli lowered his hat. The steer trotted back to the group, but Eli didn't look at the cattle. He looked at the woman. He recognized that look. He had seen it on dogs that had been kicked too many times. He had seen it on men in the war who had lost their nerve. It was the fear of enclosed spaces, of sudden noises, of anger that had nowhere to go but onto skin. He rode his horse up beside hers. He didn't reach out. He knew better than to touch a frightened thing. "The steer is safe," Eli said. His voice was low, stripped of the command he used for the livestock. "You turned him well." Ginny slowly uncurled. She looked at him, shame burning in her cheeks. "I am sorry. The noise. It is the wind." Eli lied for her. Plays tricks on the ears. He didn't ask who had shouted at her in the past. He didn't ask who had made a woman that strong afraid of a loud voice. He just turned his horse. "Let's get them home," he said. 2 days later, the sun had melted enough of the drifts to make the road passable. The supplies were low. Flour, coffee, and lamp oil were nearly gone. "We have to go to town," Eli said at breakfast. "I know," Ginny said. She looked down at her plate. "We have to fix the mistake." "With the agent?" "Yes," Eli said. The trip to town was a slog. The wagon wheels cut deep ruts into the mud, the horses straining in their collars. It took 4 hours to cover the 20 miles. For 4 hours. They sat shoulder to shoulder on the buckboard seat, the silence between them filled with the creak of leather and the suck of mud. Eli felt the isolation of his life more continuously than usual. With Ginny beside him, he realized how long it had been since he had sat next to anyone without feeling the need to check his back trail. When they rolled onto the main street of the town, the atmosphere changed instantly. It was a Tuesday, and the town was busy. Men were moving barrels in front of the mercantile. Women were walking along the boardwalks with baskets. As Eli's wagon passed, heads turned, conversation died. Eli stared straight ahead, his jaw set. He could feel the eyes on them. He could hear the whispers drifting from the sidewalks like dry leaves. "Look at the size of her. Is that the Mercer bride? Bought a freak, did he? My cousin saw her in a show in St. Louis, called her the Amazon." Ginny sat rigid beside him. She stared at the ears of the horses, her spine straight, her face a mask of practiced indifference. But Eli saw her hands clutched in her lap, her knuckles white. He pulled the wagon up to the hitching post in front of the general store and land office. He set the brake with a hard yank. "Stay close," he muttered. They climbed down. A group of men loafing on the porch of the saloon across the street watched them. One of them laughed. A sharp, ugly sound. Before they could reach the door of the store, a man stepped into their path. It was Reverend Pike, a thin man with a face like a dried apple and eyes that judged everything they touched. "Mr. Mercer," the Reverend said, his voice carrying the oily weight of false piety. "And this must be the guest we have heard so much about." "Mrs. Larson," Eli said. "Miss Larson?" "Surely," the Reverend corrected, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Unless there has been a ceremony I was not invited to perform. The Lord frowns on arrangements that lack his blessing. Eli, it brings a shadow on the whole community." Ginny looked down at the preacher. She was a head taller than him. "I am here to rectify a business error. Reverend, nothing more." "Indeed," Pike said. "See that you do. The town has standards. We do not want the eccentricities of the circus infecting our decent families." Ginny's face remained calm, but Eli saw a tremor run through the hem of her coat. "Move aside, Pike," Eli said softly. "The Lord also frowns on gossip, if I recall." He steered Ginny past the man and into the store. The agent, Mr. Abernathy, was behind the counter. He looked nervous when he saw them. He pulled a heavy ledger from beneath the counter when Eli demanded to see the order. "Here it is," Abernathy said, pointing to a line. "Paid in cash, $300. That is a heavy sum for a bride fee." "Who paid it?" Eli asked. "The name is listed as Eli Mercer," Abernathy said. "But, well, you know I wasn't here that week. My nephew took the order. He said a man came in, paid gold, gave the instructions. Said she was to be delivered to the Mercer Ranch specifically." "Did he describe the man?" Ginny asked. "Average height, dark coat, scar on his chin." Eli's blood ran cold. That was Boyd, Silas Whitmore's foreman. "It was a setup," Eli said quietly to Ginny. "They paid for you to come here knowing you would stand out, knowing the town would turn on me for housing you." "Why?" Ginny whispered. "Because a man fighting a scandal is too busy to fight for his land." They bought their supplies in silence. Flour, beans, coffee, a bolt of calico Ginny needed. As they carried the boxes out to the wagon, a shadow fell over them. Silas Whitmore stood by the wagon wheel. He was a handsome man in the way a snake is handsome. Sleek, well-fed, and dangerous. He wore a coat of fine wool and a hat that cost more than Eli's horse. Two of his ranch hands stood a few paces back, orbiting him like moons. "Eli," Whitmore said, smiling warmly. "Good to see you out. And this must be the lady." He tipped his hat to Ginny. "Silas Whitmore." "A pleasure, ma'am." Ginny nodded, wary. "I was just saying to the boys," Whitmore continued, turning his gaze back to Eli, "that you have your hands full these days. A ranch to run, and now a visitor to care for. It must be a strain." "I manage," Eli said. "You know, that offer I made on the lower section stands," Whitmore said, casually picking a piece of lint from his cuff. "In fact, I would be willing to buy the whole deed. Fair price. Enough for a man to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere less harsh. Maybe take a wife where people are not so small-minded. My land is not for sale." "Silas," Eli said. Whitmore's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went flat. "Everything is for sale. Eli, it is just a matter of how much you are willing to lose before you take the money." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "This town talks. They don't like different. They don't like stains on their moral fabric. It would be a shame if Miss Larson found her stay here. Unbearable." Behind Whitmore, Boyd, the man with the scar on his chin, leaned against a post and spat tobacco juice into the dirt. He looked at Ginny and smirked. Ginny stepped forward. She loomed over Whitmore. For a second, the cattle baron looked unsettled by her sheer physical presence. "Mr. Whitmore," Ginny said, her voice clear and carrying across the street. "I have been stared at by kings in Europe and drunks in New York. I have been managed by men who thought they owned the air I stood in. I will not be driven like livestock by you or anyone else." Whitmore stiffened. The smile vanished. "Have a safe ride home, Mercer," Whitmore said coldly. "Watch the roads. They can be treacherous." The ride back was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't empty. It was heavy with shared anger. When they got back to the ranch, they fell into work like soldiers fortifying a position. They didn't talk about leaving. They didn't talk about the bride mistake. They unpacked the wagon and started building a life. Routines began to form, knitting them together. Ginny took over the cooking and the chickens. Eli handled the heavy stock and the wood, but the lines blurred. One afternoon, Eli was mending a section of fence where a bull had broken through. He was struggling to hold the wire taut with pliers while hammering the staple. Ginny appeared beside him. She grabbed the wire with her gloved hands and pulled. The tension sang in the metal. She held it rock steady, her arms trembling slightly with the effort but never slipping. "Hammer," she said. Eli hammered. They moved down the line, post by post, a rhythm of pull, strike, release. They didn't speak, but they learned each other's timing. They learned each other's silences. A few days later, Eli brought out his rifle. He set up empty tin cans on the fence rail. "If Whitmore sends men," Eli said, "you need to know more than how to hold a pitchfork." Ginny looked at the rifle. "I don't like guns." "You do not have to like them," Eli said. "You just have to respect them." He taught her not with the flashy tricks of a showman, but with the grim practicality of a soldier. "Breath out," he instructed, standing behind her, his voice close to her ear. "Squeeze. Do not pull. Be surprised when it goes off." She fired. The can jumped. She was a natural shot. Steady hands. Calm nerves. "You learn fast," Eli said, reloading the chamber. "I pay attention," she said, that evening, after supper. Eli sat at the table staring at a pile of crumpled papers, tax receipts, banknotes, old deeds. He was rubbing his temples, his lips moving silently as he tried to make the numbers balance. Ginny watched him from the stove. "You are carrying a wrong number from the grain bill," she said. Eli looked up, defensive. "I can reckon figures fine." "You are tired," she said. She walked over and gently pulled the paper from his hand. "I can read and write." "Eli, I did the ledgers for the show manager for 2 years. He was a cheat, but the numbers were clean." Eli hesitated. Giving her the books was giving her the keys to his life. It was admitting he wasn't master of everything. He pushed the chair back. "The ink is in the drawer," he said gruffly. He went to the window and looked out at the dark, feeling a strange lightness in his chest. He had been drowning in that paperwork for years. Later that night, the wind picked up again. Eli was sitting in the chair by the fire. He had torn his shirt on the wire that morning. "Take it off," Ginny said. "I will mend it." He stripped to his undershirt. Ginny sat close to the lamp, the needle flashing in the yellow light. Eli watched her hands. They were big hands, capable of crushing, but they moved with a delicacy that made his throat tight. She bit the thread. She leaned forward to smooth the hem on his knee. Her hair had fallen loose from its pins. It smelled of sage and flower. Eli's hand lifted. He wanted to touch the stray lock of hair near her temple. He wanted to feel the warmth of her skin. The desire hit him with the force of a physical blow, not a hunger to take, but a desperate need to connect. His hand hovered inches from her face. Ginny looked up. Her eyes met his. The air in the room went still. Eli pulled his hand back as if he had touched a hot stove. He stood up abruptly. "I need to check the horses," he muttered. He went out into the cold, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stood in the dark, breathing in the freezing air, terrified by how much he wanted to go back inside. The prejudice did not stay in town. 2 mornings later, Eli rode down to the main gate to check the mailbox. Nailed to the post was a crude sign, painted on a piece of slat wood. It was a drawing, rough and obscene. It depicted a stick figure of a man standing next to a monstrous, hulking beast in a dress. The words scrawled beneath it were misspelled and vile. Mercer's Monster Stud Farm. Eli ripped the sign down, the wood splintering in his grip. Rage, white-hot and blinding, flooded his vision. He rode back to the house, hiding the wood inside his coat. But as he walked into the kitchen, he saw Ginny standing by the window. She was looking toward the gate. She had the binoculars in her hand. She turned to him. Her face was very pale. "I saw it," she said quietly. Eli froze. He pulled the broken wood from his coat and threw it into the stove. He watched the flames lick around the hateful words. "I should have made you leave," Eli said, his voice shaking. "I brought this on you. I let you stay in a place that treats people like dogs. I have seen worse signs," Ginny said. She walked to the table and sat down, her posture rigid. "In New York, they threw rotten vegetables. In London, a man tried to burn the tent down because he said I was an affront to God. That does not make it right." Eli slammed his hand on the table. "You are a person. You are the finest person I know." The words hung in the air. Ginny looked at him, her eyes wide. "I am afraid, Eli," she admitted, her voice cracking. "Not of the signs. I have nightmares. I dream of the tent. I dream of the crowds pressing in, touching me, measuring my wrists, asking if I am real. I dream that I am trapped in a box and I cannot stand up." "I know," Eli said. He walked around the table. He stood behind her chair. "I hear you in your sleep. You cry out. And you?" she asked. "You do not sleep either. You pace the floor. I fear I am no good for anything but this." Eli gestured to the gun belt hanging on the wall. "I fear that if I let myself care about anything, I will just have to kill to protect it, and I am tired of killing. I thought if I lived alone, I would not have to be that man anymore. But having you here, it makes me want to burn the whole town down for looking at you sideways." "Do not burn it," Ginny said. She stood up and turned to face him. She was eye level with him, her gaze direct and searching. "Just stand with me." They were close, too close. The heat from the stove wrapped around them. Eli looked at her mouth. He saw the tremble in her lower lip. "Ginny," he whispered. He reached out and cupped her face. His rough thumbs brushed her cheekbones. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, storybook kiss. It was hesitant, clumsy, and fierce with restraint. It was the kiss of two people who'd been starving for so long they didn't know how to eat without choking. It was almost angry in its intensity. Anger at the world. Anger at the time they had lost. Anger at the fear that still held them. Eli felt her hands grip his arms, her fingers digging into the muscle. He felt the solid, warm reality of her against him. Then he pulled away. He broke the kiss, gasping for air. He stepped back, shaking. Ginny touched her lips, her eyes dark and dilated. "Eli," she said softly. Eli couldn't speak. The desire was a roaring fire in his blood, but the fear was colder. He turned and walked to the door. "Good night, Ginny." He went out to the barn and slept in the loft, shivering under a horse blanket, listening to the wind and hating his own cowardice. The next morning brought a new crisis that washed away the awkwardness of the night before. Eli went to the pump to fill the water troughs. He worked the handle up and down. It squeaked dryly. Nothing came out. He frowned. He primed it with the jar of water they kept for emergencies. He pumped again. A trickle of brown sludge spat out. Then nothing. "Ginny!" he shouted. She came running from the chicken coop. "The creek," Eli said. "Check the creek." They ran down the slope to the stream that cut through the property. It flowed from the high country, through Whitmore's upper pasture, and down to Eli's land. The creek bed was damp mud. Puddles stood in the low spots, freezing at the edges. But the flow was gone. The water had stopped. Eli stood on the bank, looking upstream toward the property line where Whitmore's land began. "He dammed it," Eli said. His voice was deadly calm. He cut the water. Can he do that? Ginny asked, staring at the drying mud. Is it legal? No, Eli said. But he owns the judge, and without water, the cattle die in 3 days. We die in a week. He turned to look at the ranch house. Then back at Ginny. The landscape itself had been turned into a weapon. This isn't a hint anymore, Eli said. It is a siege. Ginny straightened up. She wiped her hands on her apron. The fear was gone from her face, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Then we fight, she said. Eli looked at her, the woman the town called a monster, the woman he had kissed and run from, and nodded. We fight, he agreed. The creek bed, once a ribbon of life cutting through the dry plains, had become a scar of cracked mud. The silence of the ranch was no longer peaceful. It was the holding of breath before a death rattle. For 7 days, Eli Mercer and Ginny Larson lived the life of pack animals. The water theft by Silas Whitmore was not merely a boundary dispute. It was a slow strangulation. They spent their waking hours hauling water from the deep well near the old homestead ruins, 3 miles to the south. It was back-breaking work. They filled barrels, hoisted them into the wagon, and drove the team carefully over the uneven ground to fill the troughs for the cattle that remained. The dust was everywhere. It coated the inside of the cabin, settled in the creases of their clothes, and gritted between their teeth. The livestock grew gaunt, their ribs showing like the staves of a barrel. We have to file a claim, Ginny said one evening. She was scrubbing the dust from her arms with a damp rag, rationing even the water they used to wash. There are laws, Eli, riparian rights. You cannot just dam a creek and starve your neighbor. Eli sat at the table, cleaning his revolver. The smell of gun oil was sharp in the stagnant air. Laws are for men who have dinner with the judge, he said. In this valley, the law is whatever Silas Whitmore says it is. We can gather witnesses, Ginny insisted. She turned to him, her face streaked with fatigue but her eyes bright with defiance. The widow down the road, the vaquero who saw the dam, if we put it on paper, if we force them to look at it in a court. No court will hear me, Eli snapped. He holstered the gun with a loud thud. You want to know why I live alone? Why the town looks at me like a rabid dog? 5 years ago, a man was shot on the North Ridge, one of Whitmore's hands. I was there. We had argued over fence lines. They found him dead with a bullet from a .44, the same caliber I carry. He stood up, pacing the small room. Whitmore pushed for a hanging. The circuit judge knew it was thin evidence, no witnesses, just bad blood. I walked free, but the gavel never really came down. To them, I'm a killer who got lucky. If I walk into a courtroom now, they will not see a victim of water theft. They will see a murderer complaining about the heat. Ginny went quiet. She looked at the man she'd been living with, the hard lines of his face, the tension in his shoulders. She realized then that his isolation was not just grief. It was a fortress built against a world that had already convicted him. But the past was not finished with Ginny, either. 2 days later, the mail rider left a packet at the gate. Eli brought it in, his face grim. There was a letter addressed to Miss Ingrid Larson. The handwriting was flamboyant, heavy with ink. Ginny opened it, her large hands trembling slightly. As she read, the color drained from her face, leaving her looking like marble. Braddock, she whispered. The manager? Eli asked. He knows where I am, she said. She dropped the letter on the table as if it were burning. He says I'm in breach of contract. He says I owe him $2,000 for training, costumes, and travel expenses. He says, she swallowed hard. He says I'm his property until the debt is paid. And he is coming to collect. Eli picked up the letter. He cannot own a person, not since the war. He owns my name, Ginny said, her voice hollow. He owns the debts he forged. He has papers. Eli, he always has papers. The siege was tightening. From the west, the drought. From the east, the law. And from the south, a man who saw Ginny not as a woman, but as a sideshow attraction to be caged. The supply of grain ran out on a Tuesday. Despite the risk, They had to go to town. The horses were weakening, and without feed, they would not survive the week. The town felt different this time. The stares were not just curious, they were hostile. Whitmore's influence had soured the air. Men stopped talking when Eli's wagon creaked past. Women gathered their skirts and turned their backs. They entered the general store. Eli went to the counter to negotiate for grain on credit, his pride swallowing the bile in his throat. Ginny moved to the back, looking for canvas to patch the water barrels. She was alone in the aisle when 3 young men walked in. They were range bums, drifters who worked seasonal jobs and spent their wages on cheap whiskey. They smelled of sweat and stale spirits. One of them, a wiry boy with a gap in his teeth, blocked Ginny's path. "Lord Almighty," he jeered, looking her up and down. "Whitmore said it was big, but I didn't know they grew 'em this high." Ginny tried to step around him. "Excuse me," the second man stepped in, cutting her off. He reached out and poked her arm with a dirty finger. "Solid, too. Feels like a draft horse. Hey, lady, can you pull a plow? I got a field needs turning." The third man laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Show us your teeth, darling. Let's see if you're worth the feed." Ginny froze. It was the old nightmare, the one that woke her screaming. She was back in the tent. The crowd was pressing in. She was not a person. She was a thing to be prodded and discussed. Her breath caught in her throat. She could not speak. She could not move. She stood there, a giantess paralyzed by the smallness of their cruelty. "Leave her be," a voice said. It was low, vibrating with a deadly frequency. Eli stood at the end of the aisle. He had left the counter. His hands hung loose at his sides, near his hips. The gap-toothed boy sneered. "We are just inspecting the livestock, Mercer, since you are so fond of strange breeds." Eli moved. He did not walk. He blurred. He crossed the distance in 2 strides. He grabbed the boy by the throat and slammed him backward into the shelves. Cans of peaches and sacks of flour crashed to the floor. The other 2 men flinched, hands going to their belts, but Eli was faster. He drew his revolver, the barrel jamming hard under the chin of the boy he had pinned. "I will paint this wall with you," Eli whispered. His eyes were wide and unblinking, devoid of humanity. "Give me a reason. Breathe wrong. Blink. Give me a reason." The boy gurgled, his eyes rolling back in terror. The shop went deathly silent. The storekeep stood frozen behind the counter. Ginny stared at Eli. She saw the man the town believed him to be. She saw the violence he held on a leash, and the leash had snapped. He was shaking, not with fear, but with the terrifying effort it took not to pull the trigger. "Eli," Ginny said. Her voice was soft, cutting through the red haze. "Eli, do not—" Eli held the pose for a heartbeat longer, a heartbeat that lasted an eternity. Then, slowly, he lowered the hammer. He shoved the boy away. "Get out," Eli rasped. The 3 men scrambled over each other to escape, crashing through the door and into the street. Eli stood amidst the spilled flour, his chest heaving. He holstered his gun, but his hands were still trembling. Deputy Cal Harlan appeared in the doorway a moment later. He looked at the mess, then at Eli. He didn't arrest him. Instead, he walked over, stepping over a rolling can of peaches. "You are making it easy for him." "Eli," Cal said quietly. "They cornered her." Eli said, "I know," Cal said. He looked at Ginny, and for the first time there was a flicker of genuine pity in his eyes. "But Whitmore is pushing the judge. He is asking for a warrant." "For what?" Eli demanded. "Vagrancy," Cal said, "and immorality. Cohabitation without marriage. He says it is an affront to the decency of the territory. If he gets that paper signed, I have to come and take her. Eli, I have to put her in a cell until she can be deported back to wherever she came from." "She has a home," Eli said. "She is with me." "Not in the eyes of the law," Cal said. "To the law. She is a stray woman living in sin with a suspected killer. Fix it, Eli, or I will be back with cuffs." The ride back to the ranch was a funeral procession. The dust swirled around the wagon wheels. "We have to marry," Ginny said. She spoke to the horizon, not looking at him. Eli gripped the reins until his knuckles turned white. I will not do it. I will not drag you into a church and make a show of us for people who hate us. It is not about them, Jenny said. She turned to him. It is the only way to kill the warrant. If I am your wife, they cannot charge us with immorality. If I am Mrs. Mercer, I have a legal right to be on that land. Whitmore cannot touch me. It is a trap, Eli said bitterly. It is just another way for them to laugh. Let them laugh, Jenny said fiercely. I do not care if they laugh. I care if they lock me in a cage. I care if Braddock takes me back. Eli, please. He looked at her. He saw the desperation, but he also saw the logic. It was a tactical move, a survival choice. Tomorrow, Eli said. We will go to the parson tomorrow. That night, the cabin felt different. The air was charged with the weight of the coming day. It wasn't a celebration. It was a fortification. Jenny worked by the light of the kerosene lamp. She had taken the dress she arrived in, the gray travel dress, and was letting out the hem. It was the only fine thing she owned, and it was battered and stained. She scrubbed her boots with lard until the leather shone dark and rich. Eli sat on his pallet, watching her. He held a small object in his hand. It was a ring, simple gold, worn thin by time. It had belonged to his mother. Jenny, he said. She looked up, the needle poised in her hand. I have nothing to give you, Eli said. His voice was rough, scraping against the silence. This ranch is dying. My name is Mud. I'm a man who almost killed a boy over a can of peaches today. You saved me, Jenny said. I almost destroyed us, he corrected. He stood up and walked to the table. He placed the ring on the wood between them. I want to do this, but not because of the warrant, and not because of Whitmore. He looked at her, really looked at her. The firelight caught the strong planes of her face, the capability in her hands, the tired slump of her shoulders. I want the warmth, Eli confessed. The words felt like he was tearing them out of his chest. I want to wake up and know you are there. I want the future we are fighting for. I want the right to touch you without feeling like I am stealing something. He reached out and took her hand. It engulfed his, warm and calloused. But I am afraid, he whispered. I am afraid I will ruin you. The West, it ruins soft things, and I am part of the ruin. Jenny turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his. She stood up, rising to her full height, looking down at him with a tenderness that broke his heart. I am not soft, Eli, she said. I have never been soft. The world would not let me be. She stepped closer. But I am afraid, too. I am afraid of being owned. Braddock owned me. The crowds owned me. I need you to understand that this ring, it cannot be a purchase. You have to choose me as an equal, not as a shelter, not as a hired hand. I choose you, Eli said. I choose you every day. He picked up the ring and slid it onto her finger. It fit. They stood there in the quiet house, holding on to each other, terrified and hopeful, while the wind howled outside like a wolf at the door. The wedding was brief, cold, and stripped of all joy. The church was empty save for the parson, a man who hurried through the liturgy as if he were afraid God might catch him doing it. The air in the sanctuary was stale and cold. Eli wore his Sunday suit, black wool that smelled of cedar and disuse. Jenny wore the gray dress, her hair pinned up severely, trying to shrink herself, though she towered over the parson. Do you take this woman? I do. Do you take this man? I do. When they turned to leave, the doors opened. Silas Whitmore stood on the steps. He was smiling. It was the smile of a man watching a trap snap shut. Behind him stood the town. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the rumor of the giant bride. They walked down the steps into the gauntlet of eyes. Congratulations, Mercer, Whitmore called out. A distinct match, truly. Laughter rippled through the crowd, but then a small fissure appeared in the wall of hostility. An older woman, the widow Gable, stepped forward. She was small and bent. She held out a small posy of dried sage and winter berries tied with a piece of twine. "For the bride," the widow murmured, pressing it into Ginny's hand. "God bless you, child." "Ignore the fools." Ginny took the flowers, her eyes filling with sudden tears. A shopkeeper, Mr. Henderson, tipped his hat as they passed, pointedly turning his back on Whitmore's men. It was a tiny victory, a glimmer of light in the gray. But as Eli helped Ginny into the wagon, he saw a man standing at the edge of the crowd. A man in a checkered suit with a derby hat and a mustache waxed to sharp points. It was the man from the nightmares, Braddock. He wasn't smiling. He was staring at Ginny with a look of possessive fury. He tapped a rolled-up paper against his palm. He didn't approach. He just watched. "Drive," Ginny whispered, clutching the dried flowers so hard the stems snapped. "Eli, drive." They took the canyon road home to avoid the town. The sun was setting, casting long, purple shadows across the ravine. The air was biting cold. Eli whipped the horses, urging them into a trot. He watched the ridges, his instinct screaming that something was wrong. "He was there," Ginny said, her voice trembling. "Braddock was there." "We will handle him," Eli said. "You are my wife now. The law protects you." "Braddock does not care about law," she said. They reached the narrowest part of the pass, where the road hugged the edge of a deep ravine. The drop was 50 feet to the rocky creek bed below. A crack echoed off the canyon walls. It sounded like a branch snapping, but Eli knew that sound. It was a rifle shot. Dirt kicked up inches from the lead horse's hoof. The team panicked. The horses screamed and reared, the wagon lurching violently toward the edge. "Get down!" Eli shouted. He shoved Ginny onto the floorboards of the wagon. Another shot whined past his ear. Chaos erupted. The horses were tangling in their traces, dragging the wagon toward the precipice. Eli fought the reins, standing up to leverage his weight against the terrified animals. "Whoa! Back!" he roared. A third shot rang out. Eli felt a blow like a sledgehammer hit his side. The breath left him in a rush. The world tilted. He fell backward, the reins slipping from his fingers. The wagon hit a rock and tipped. "Eli!" Ginny screamed. The world went black for a second. When Eli opened his eyes, he was lying in the dirt. The wagon was on its side, the wheels spinning lazily. The horses had broken the traces and bolted down the road. He tried to sit up, but pain, hot and white, exploded in his ribs. He looked down. His coat was dark with blood. "Stay down," Ginny hissed. She was there, crawling through the dirt. She grabbed him by the collar. He was a heavy man, dead weight with the injury, but she pulled him. She dragged him behind the cover of a large boulder just as another bullet chipped the stone where his head had been. "Are you hit?" Eli gasped, clutching his side. "No," Ginny said. Her face was dusted with dirt, her wedding dress torn at the shoulder. "They are up on the ridge. 2 of them." She looked at his wound. She ripped the hem of her petticoat, her strong hands rending the fabric with a sharp, tearing sound. She pressed the cloth against the hole in his side. "Hold this," she commanded. "Leave me." Eli wheezed. "Run into the brush. They want me." "Shut up," Ginny said. She stood up, crouching low. She looked around. 100 yards away, there was a shallow cave, an overhang of rock near the creek bed. "We have to move," she said. "I cannot walk." Eli gritted out. "I know," she said. She bent down. She grabbed his arm and draped it over her shoulders. Then she put her arm around his waist. "Up," she said. She lifted him. She didn't just support him. She took his weight. She was a giantess, a spectacle, a freak, and right now, she was a miracle. She carried him, half running, half stumbling, moving with a strength that defied the physics of the situation. Bullets kicked up dust around their feet, but they made the shelter of the overhang. Ginny lowered him gently to the sandy floor. The sun went down, taking the light and the heat with it. The night was a fever dream. Eli drifted in and out of consciousness. He felt the heat of a small fire. He felt the pressure of hands on his side. He heard Ginny tearing wood from a piece of drift log, snapping thick branches as if they were twigs. "Stay with me, Eli," she whispered. Her voice was the only anchor in the dark. Sometime before dawn, the fever spiked. Eli was shivering, his teeth chattering. Ginny lay next to him, wrapping her large frame around his, sharing her body heat. She held him tight, a stubborn refusal to let him go. "I should have sent you back," Eli mumbled. "You chose me," she whispered into his hair. "You chose me." When the gray light of dawn began to seep into the canyon, a shadow fell across the opening of the cave. Eli's hand scrabbled for his gun, but it was gone, lost in the crash. Ginny sat up. She picked up a heavy rock, her knuckles white. But it wasn't Whitmore's riders. It was Braddock. He stood just outside the overhang, looking impeccable even in the wild. He held a handkerchief to his nose. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, the name dripping with sarcasm. "Or should I say, my Amazon queen." Ginny stood up. She stepped between Braddock and Eli. She filled the entrance of the cave. "Get away," she warned. Her voice was low and dangerous. Now, Ingrid." Braddock clucked his tongue. "Let us be civilized. I saw the accident. Terrible luck. Is the cowboy dead yet?" "He is alive," Ginny said. "Barely?" Braddock noted. He took a step closer, holding up a sheaf of papers. "Here is the situation. My dear, I have spoken with your Mr. Whitmore, a charming man. We have come to an arrangement." He tapped the papers. "I have a warrant for your arrest, theft, breach of contract, immorality. If the sheriff comes down here, he will take you, and he will take Mr. Mercer for kidnapping and abetting a fugitive. Whitmore tells me the town is ready to hang him for the trouble he has caused." Ginny went still. "However," Braddock smiled, a thin, cruel line, "if you return with me, voluntarily, immediately, I will consider the debt settled. I will tear up the warrant, and Mr. Whitmore agrees to let the cowboy live. He will even send a doctor down here to patch him up." "You are lying," Ginny said. "Am I?" Braddock shrugged. "Look at him. Ingrid, he is bleeding out. If you stay, he dies. If the posse comes, he hangs. The only way he lives is if you leave." Ginny turned to look at Eli. He was pale, his breathing shallow and wet. He looked small and broken on the sand. She looked at Braddock. "If I go, you send the doctor. You swear it?" "On my mother's grave." Braddock lied smoothly. "Whitmore's men are waiting on the road. They have a buckboard." Ginny looked back at Eli one last time. She memorized his face, the line of his jaw, the gray in his stubble. The man who had looked at her and seen a wife. Not a monster. "I will pack my things," she said softly. "No time for packing," Braddock said. "We go now." Ginny knelt beside Eli. He was semi-conscious, his eyes fluttering. "Eli," she whispered. She kissed his forehead. It was burning hot. "I have to go. To save you." "No," Eli groaned. He tried to grab her hand, but his fingers were weak. Don't go." "I have to," she said. Tears spilled down her dusty cheeks, tracking through the grime. "I chose you, so I have to let you go." She stood up. She walked out of the cave, past Braddock, into the cold morning light. "Smart girl," Braddock sneered. He signaled up the ridge. Eli watched through a haze of pain and fever. He saw the silhouette of the woman he loved walking away. She was tall, taller than the trees, walking with her head high, half sacrifice, half flight. Behind her, the shadow of Silas Whitmore seemed to close in, swallowing the light. As Eli slipped into the darkness, Eli woke to the sound of the wind scraping through the canyon, a hollow, mournful noise that sounded like the earth itself was grieving. He was alone. He lay on the sandy floor of the shallow cave, the cold seeping up through the rock and into his bones. His side throbbed with a dull, sickening heat where the bullet had grazed his ribs. But the pain in his body was distant compared to the silence that pressed against his ears. He turned his head, gritting his teeth against the stiffness in his neck. The fire Ginny had built was nothing but a pile of cold, gray ash. The place where she had lain beside him, holding his fever at bay with her own warmth, was empty. The sand was disturbed, showing the imprint of her heavy boots leading out toward the light. "Ginny," he croaked. His voice was a wreck, dry as the creek bed outside. There was no answer, only the wind. He forced himself to sit up. The world tilted and spun, gray spots dancing in his vision. He waited for the nausea to pass, his hand going instinctively to his side. She had bound the wound tight with strips of her petticoat. It was holding. His eyes scanned the small shelter. On a flat rock near the entrance, weighed down by a stone, was a scrap of white fabric. Eli crawled toward it. It was a torn piece of the same cotton she had used to bind him. Written on it, in charcoal from the dead fire, were words scrawled in a frantic, heavy hand. "He offered a doctor for you if I went. I am buying your life, Eli. Do not follow. Live." Eli crumbled the fabric in his fist. The loneliness hit him then, not as a quiet ache, but as a physical blow that knocked the breath from his lungs. It reopened every wound he had carried for 7 years. The silence of the grave on the ridge, the empty chair at the table, the feeling of being a man the world had discarded. She had left to save him. She had sold herself back into the cage to keep him from the noose. "No," Eli growled. He used the rock wall to lever himself to his feet. A fresh wave of pain washed over him, hot and sharp. But he welcomed it. The pain was fuel. The guilt was better than the emptiness. He stumbled out into the canyon. The morning was bright and harsh. Down in the wash, he saw movement. One of the horses, the bay mare, had tangled her reins in a patch of mesquite brush during the ambush. She was waiting there, head down, exhausted. Eli didn't think about the odds. He didn't think about the fever burning behind his eyes, or the fact that he was one man against an organization that owned the law. He thought only of Ginny, sitting tall in a wagon, being driven away like cattle. He freed the mare, his fingers clumsy on the leather. He pulled himself into the saddle with a groan that tore from his throat. "Let's go," he whispered to the horse. "We have to catch them." The trail was easy to follow, but the land was punishing. The tracks of the buckboard cut deep into the mud of the road, heading north toward the railhead at Iron Ridge. The wind turned vicious, driving sleet into Eli's face. The country here was broken rock and scrubbed cedar, a place where nothing grew without a fight. Eli rode with a fierce, terrifying clarity. For years, he had told himself that love was a weakness, a way for the world to hurt you. Now, he knew the truth. Love was not possession. It was not ownership. It was the refusal to let the other person walk through the dark alone. He would not let her be hunted. He rode for 4 hours. The fever made the landscape blur and twist. The rocks looked like faces. The trees looked like men waiting in ambush. He kept his hand on the pommel of the saddle to keep from falling. Iron Ridge was not a town. It was a scar on the side of a mountain where men dug for copper and drank away their misery. It was a collection of tents and shacks clustered around a rail depot. Eli crested the rise and saw the train sitting on the spur line, steam venting from its engine in white clouds. He spurred the mare. She stumbled but found her footing, sliding down the shale slope toward the camp. He saw them on the platform, a group of men in rough coats, and in the center, standing a head taller than any of them, was Ginny. She was not bound with rope, but she was surrounded. Braddock stood near her, checking a pocket watch, looking impatient. Eli pulled the mare up at the edge of the platform. The horse was blowing hard, her sides heaving. Eli slid from the saddle. His legs nearly buckled, but he locked his knees and stood. Braddock turned. His eyes widened in genuine surprise, then narrowed into a sneer. "You are a persistent cockroach, Mr. Mercer," Braddock called out. "I thought you would be dead by now." Ginny spun around. When she saw him, dusty, blood-soaked, swaying on his feet, her face crumbled. "Eli!" she cried out. She took a step toward him, but one of Braddock's hired guns stepped in her path, his hand resting on his pistol. "I told you to live!" Ginny shouted, her voice breaking. "Why did you come?" "I am not done living," Eli said. His voice was quiet, but it carried over the hiss of the steam engine. He looked at the men surrounding her. There were 5 of them, hard men with low-slung holsters. In a fair fight, Eli would be dead before he cleared leather. In his current state, he wouldn't even clear leather. Braddock smiled. "This is perfect. You are trespassing on railroad property. Mercer, my men are deputized agents of the line. If you reach for that gun, they will cut you down, and the law will call it self-defense." Eli looked at Ginny. She was terrified, not for herself, but for him. She was watching the hands of the gunmen, calculating the angles. She was waiting for the moment to move, to throw herself in front of a bullet. Eli took a deep breath. He moved his hand away from his gun belt. He held his palms open. "I am not here to fight you, Braddock," Eli said. "Then you are here to watch her leave?" Braddock laughed. "How romantic." "I'm here," Eli said, turning his head slightly to scan the crowd that had gathered. Miners, rail workers, a few travelers. To report a crime, kidnapping, extortion, and attempted murder. "You have no witnesses," Braddock scoffed. "Just a dead man talking." "I have eyes," a voice said from behind Eli. Deputy Cal Harlan stepped out from the shadow of the station house. He looked tired. His coat was dusty, and he looked like a man who had spent a long time wrestling with his own soul. Braddock stiffened. "Deputy, this man is a fugitive. I have the papers." Cal walked up the steps of the platform. He stood next to Eli. He didn't draw his gun, but he hooked his thumbs in his belt. "I saw the papers, Braddock," Cal said. "And I saw the ambush in the canyon. I was tracking Whitmore's boys. I saw them shoot a man and a woman who were riding peaceful." "That was an accident," Braddock said quickly, his slick composure cracking. "A case of mistaken identity." "And the woman?" Cal asked. "Is she going with you of her own free will?" Braddock gripped Ginny's arm. "She is under contract. She has debts." "I have no debts to you," Ginny said. Her voice rang out, clear and strong. She shook Braddock's hand off her arm. "I worked off that money 3 years ago. You cooked the books, and I am not going back to be your animal." She stepped toward the edge of the platform. The gunman hesitated. He looked at the deputy, then at the crowd of miners watching. He dropped his hand from his gun. "This is a civil matter," Braddock hissed. "I will take this to the circuit court. I will own you, Mercer. I will take your land." "You can try," Eli said. He stepped forward and took Ginny's hand. Her fingers closed around his, tight and desperate. "But you are not taking my wife." "Wife," Braddock spat. "Married yesterday." Cal Harlan confirmed. "I saw the license myself, which means, Mr. Braddock, that you are attempting to transport a married woman across state lines against her will. That is a federal offense." Braddock looked around. The crowd was muttering. The train conductor was watching with a frown. The tide had turned. "Fine," Braddock snarled. He straightened his coat. "Keep her. Starve together on that dirt patch. But tell Whitmore I am done. He promised me a clean extraction, not a circus." He signaled to his men. They backed away, boarding the train car. Eli didn't move until the whistle blew and the train lurched forward, steam hissing. Only then did the adrenaline leave him. He sagged, the black edges of his vision closing in. Ginny caught him. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him up, her face buried in his dusty neck. "You fool," she whispered. "You stubborn, beautiful fool. Let's go home," Eli whispered. Cal Harlan rode with them part of the way back. The deputy was quiet, chewing on a toothpick, his eyes on the horizon. "I should have stepped in sooner," Cal said eventually. "When Whitmore cut the water, I knew it was wrong." "You are here now," Eli said from the back of the wagon they had reclaimed near the crash site. Ginny was driving. Eli was lying on the straw, too weak to sit. "Whitmore is not going to stop," Cal warned. "He is going to be angry that Braddock failed. He will come at you hard." "Eli? Let him come," Ginny said from the driver's seat. They crested the final ridge that overlooked the Mercer Ranch just as the sun was beginning to set. Ginny pulled on the reins. The wagon stopped. "Eli?" she said. Her voice was strangled. Eli pulled himself up to look. There was no house. There was no barn. Thick, black smoke was still curling up into the twilight sky. The barn was a skeleton of charred timbers. The haystack was a black smolder on the ground. The house, the sturdy, lonely house Eli had built with his own hands, was gutted. The roof had collapsed. Whitmore had not waited for Braddock to leave. He had struck while the property was undefended. "No," Jenny whispered. They rode down the hill in silence. The air smelled of wet ash and ruin. The heat was still radiating from the stones of the chimney. The corral was empty. The fence had been cut, and the few remaining cattle were scattered to the winds. They stopped the wagon in the yard. Jenny climbed down. She walked toward the remains of the house. She reached out and touched a blackened support beam. It crumbled under her hand, staining her fingers with soot. She made a sound, a low, keen of grief that had nothing to do with the timber and everything to do with the message. "It is gone," she said. "Everything, the flour, the blankets, the winter feed." She turned to Eli, her eyes wild. "I did this. I brought this here. It is a curse. Eli, anything I touch, it gets destroyed." She sank to her knees in the mud and ash, covering her face with her soot-stained hands. Eli climbed out of the wagon. He fell once, gritting his teeth against the pain, but he got up. He walked over to her. He knelt beside her in the muck. He didn't tell her it would be all right. He didn't tell her it was just a house. He pulled her hands away from her face and held them. "Look at me," he said. She shook her head, sobbing. "He burned it all." "He missed something," Eli said. She looked at him through her tears. "He missed us," Eli said. "The house is wood. The barn is straw. We can cut more wood. We can grow more straw. But he didn't break us." He pulled her into his chest. She collapsed against him, weeping, her large frame shaking with the force of her grief. Eli held her, rocking her slightly, stroking her hair, which smelled of smoke, for the first time in his life. He didn't feel the urge to fix it alone. He felt the weight of the disaster, but it was a shared weight, and because it was shared, it was bearable. They did not leave. That night, they slept in the root cellar, the only structure that had survived the fire intact. It was damp and smelled of potatoes and earth, but it was out of the wind. They huddled together under the buffalo robes they had salvaged from the wagon. It was freezing. The temperature dropped well below zero. "We have to stay close," Eli whispered in the dark. "For the heat." "I am not cold," Jenny lied, her teeth chattering. Eli wrapped his arms around her. They lay facing each other, legs entwined. The intimacy was absolute. There was no shyness left. They were two survivors clinging to a raft in a freezing ocean, in the darkness, listening to the wind howl over the ruins of their home. They learned the rhythm of each other's breathing. They learned the shape of each other's fear. The next morning, the work began. It was grim, brutal labor. They scavenged nails from the ashes, straightening them with a hammer on a flat rock. They salvaged half-burned planks to build a lean-to against the side of the root cellar. Days turned into a week. They lived on the meager supplies they had bought in town and water from the deep well. They were hungry, cold, and exhausted, but they were not defeated. One evening, by the light of a single lantern in their makeshift shelter, Eli took Jenny's hand. Her knuckles were raw and bleeding from the cold and the work. There were old scars there, 2 faint white lines from years of handling ropes and tent poles. Eli lifted her hand. He didn't say anything. He just pressed his lips to the scars, one by one. It was a gesture of reverence. He was honoring the labor that had shaped her, the strength that had carried him out of the canyon. Jenny went still. She watched him, her eyes soft in the lamplight. She reached out and touched his side, where the bandage covered the bullet wound. She didn't flinch at the sight of the angry, red flesh. She laid her palm over it, feeling the beat of his heart beneath the injury. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. "Only when I breathe." Eli joked weakly. "Then do not breathe," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him. This kiss was different from the first one. It wasn't angry. It was slow, deep, and desperate with life. It was an affirmation that they were still here, still warm, still capable of softness in a hard world. Help came from the shadows. 10 days after the fire, Eli woke to find a stack of lumber near the well. Fresh, seasoned pine. There was no note. 2 days later, a sack of potatoes and a side of cured bacon appeared on the stone wall of the corral. Then, one afternoon, an old man rode up on a mule. It was Mateo, a vaquero who lived in a shack on the edge of the Badlands. He had worked for Eli's father years ago. He didn't get down. He just tipped his sombrero. "The wind blows hard this year, patron," Mateo said. "It does. Mateo," Eli said, leaning on his shovel. "Whitmore has many eyes," Mateo said, looking at the ground. "But he does not see everything. The widow Gable sends her regards, and this—" He tossed a heavy canvas bag to the ground. It clinked with the sound of nails. "Why?" Eli asked. "Whitmore will burn you out if he knows." "Whitmore thinks he owns the sun," Mateo said, spitting to the side. "But the sun shines on all of us. And my wife saw the senora carry you. She says a woman with a heart that big should not sleep in the dirt." Mateo turned his mule and rode away. Ginny watched him go. She picked up the bag of nails. "We are not alone," she said. "No," Eli said, feeling a lump in his throat. "We are not." That night, Ginny brought out a piece of paper she had salvaged. "We fight him," she said. "Not just with guns. If Mateo saw us, others saw things too. We write it down. We get sworn statements. We build a wall of paper that Whitmore cannot burn. The judge is bought," Eli argued gently. "Then we go to the circuit judge in the capital," Ginny said. "We go higher, but we need the truth. Eli, all of it." She looked at him. "You have to tell the truth about the killing. The man on the ridge." Eli looked into the fire. He had never told the whole story to anyone. Not even the sheriff. "His name was Sutter," Eli began, his voice low. "He worked for Whitmore. He cut my fence line 3 nights in a row. I rode out to fix it. He was waiting for me." Eli rubbed his face. He didn't say a word. He just opened fire. He shot my horse out from under me. I was pinned. He was walking toward me, reloading, laughing. He said Whitmore told him he could have the ranch if he cleared the rat out. Ginny listened, her hand on his knee. "I shot him," Eli said. "One shot, center mass. It was me or him, but when the sheriff came, the fence was fixed. The dead horse was dragged away. Sutter's gun was gone. It looked like I had ridden up and shot an unarmed man in the back. Whitmore's other men testified they saw it from the ridge. They lied. And the town believed them," Ginny said. "The town wanted to believe them." Eli said, "It is easier to believe the quiet man is a killer than to believe the rich man is a monster." Ginny squeezed his knee. "Now, tell me yours." Eli said, "The debt." Ginny looked away. "My father was a miner in Minnesota. He died in a collapse. My mother, she couldn't feed us. I was 14 and already 6 feet tall. Braddock came through with his show. He offered my mother $200 for my apprenticeship." She swallowed hard. "She took it. She had to. I went with him. He told me I was a freak of nature. He made me wear skins and carry a club. He made me roar at the crowds. If I didn't roar loud enough, he didn't feed me. He added the food to my debt. He added the clothes. He added the train tickets. I worked for 10 years, Eli, and the debt only got bigger." She looked at her hands. "I learned to be hard. I learned to freeze inside so their eyes couldn't touch me. But I missed. I missed being soft. I missed being a girl." Eli reached out and took her face in his hands. "You are not a freak, Ginny. And you are not hard. You are the strongest thing I have ever seen. And you are free. We are going to court," Ginny said, her voice fierce. "We are going to tell them everything. Even if they laugh. Even if they laugh," Eli agreed. They did not get the chance to file first. 3 days later, a buggy rode up to the burned-out homestead. It was not Cal Harlan. It was a process server from the county seat, flanked by 2 of Whitmore's hired guns. The man handed Eli a document with a wax seal. "Eviction notice," the man said, bored. Pursuant to the claim filed by Silas Whitmore regarding the invalidity of the original homestead deed and violation of water rights. What violation? Eli demanded. He cut the water. The claim states you diverted the natural flow to hoard it, the man said, shrugging, and that the original survey of this land was flawed. It belongs to the Whitmore estate. Eli looked at the paper. It was a wall of legal gibberish, backed by lies and money. You have 2 weeks to vacate the premises, the man said. 14 days. If you are still here on the 15th at noon, the sheriff is authorized to remove you by force. We aren't going anywhere, Ginny said, stepping up beside Eli. Then you will be removed. Ma'am, the man said. He climbed back into the buggy. 14 days. Tick-tock. They watched the buggy drive away. The dust settled on the ruins of their home. Eli looked at the paper, then at Ginny. The countdown had begun. They had 2 weeks to find a way to beat a man who owned the law, or they would lose everything they had bled for. Get the wagon, Eli said, folding the paper and putting it in his pocket. We are going to find those witnesses. The root cellar smelled of earth, potato dust, and the sharp tang of cheap ink. It had become the command center for a war that was being fought not with bullets, but with paper. For the first time in his life, Eli Mercer felt outflanked by words. He sat on a crate, squinting at a document by the light of a kerosene lantern that hissed softly in the damp air. His hands, calloused and scarred from wire and rope, looked clumsy holding the delicate nib of a pen. Ginny sat across from him on a barrel, her long legs tucked beneath a plank of wood she was using as a desk. She was writing with a speed and fluidity that baffled him. She dipped the pen, scratched a line, blotted it, and moved to the next sheet. Her concentration was absolute, a fortress of will that the cold draft seeping through the door could not breach. This affidavit for the widow Gable, Eli said, his voice raspy. Do I write that she saw the dam, or that she saw the men building the dam? Both, Ginny said without looking up. Be specific, Eli. The law feeds on details. If you just say she saw it, Whitmore's lawyer will say she is an old woman with bad eyes who saw a beaver dam. Right, that she saw 3 men with shovels and a wagon marked with the double W brand on Tuesday last. Eli grunted and bent back to the paper. He hated this. He hated the feeling of trapping truth in ink when he knew the truth lived in the mud of the creek bed. But he watched Ginny, her jaw set, her eyes scanning the legal statutes she had borrowed from the parson, and he dipped his pen again. They were building a defense out of scraps. Ginny had insisted they document everything: the date the water stopped, the threats from Boyd, the arrival of the false letter, the fire. She made lists of witnesses, however reluctant. She drafted letters to the territorial governor, to the circuit judge, to the land office in Washington City. We are shouting into a windstorm, Eli muttered, setting the pen down to rub his cramping hand. Then we shout louder, Ginny said. She looked up, her eyes dark with fatigue but burning with that same blue fire he had seen in the canyon. Whitmore counts on silence. Eli, he counts on men like you being too proud to complain and too tired to fight back with anything but a gun. We will bury him in paper before we let him bury us in the ground. The deadline for the eviction was approaching like a thunderstorm on the horizon. 10 days left. We have to go to Red Rock, Ginny said, stacking her papers. The county seat, Judge Halloway, sits next week. We file these motions in person, and we face Braddock's claim. Red Rock is 3 days' ride, Eli said. The cattle will have to forage, Ginny said. If we lose the land, the cattle are gone anyway. The journey to Red Rock was a passage through the scale of the West that made human troubles feel insignificant, yet undeniably lethal. They took the wagon, patched and wobbling on a cracked axle, pulled by the bay mare and the roan gelding. The road wound out of the valley and onto the high scrub plains. The dust was a living thing, a fine, alkaline powder that coated their throats and stung their eyes. To the north, the mountains rose up like jagged teeth biting into the belly of the sky. To the south, the flatlands stretched into an infinity of brown and gray. They camped near a dry wash on the second night, The wind had died, leaving a silence so profound it rang in the ears. The stars were hard, bright points of ice, looking down with total indifference. Eli lay on his bedroll, looking up. Ginny lay beside him, her shoulder touching his. "Do you think the judge will listen?" she asked. Her voice was small against the vastness of the night. "He might," Eli said. "Red Rock is bigger than our town. Whitmore's money does not reach as deep there." "I'm not afraid of the judge," Ginny admitted. "I am afraid of the room. Braddock will be there. He will try to make me small. He will try to make me a monster again." Eli turned on his side. He reached out and placed his hand on her arm. Through the wool of her coat, he could feel the solid strength of her muscle. "You are not a monster," Eli said firmly. "You are the woman who carried a grown man out of a canyon while bullets were flying. You are the woman who rebuilt a wall with hands that were bleeding. If they cannot see that, they are the blind ones. They see what they are told to see," Ginny whispered. "Then we tell them something else," Eli said. Red Rock was a bustle of noise and commerce, a town that had grown fat on cattle money and mining claims. It had brick buildings, boardwalks that didn't creak, and a courthouse with white pillars that tried to look like Rome, but looked more like a wedding cake left out in the sun. As they drove the wagon down the main street, the reaction was the same as it had been at home, but mixed with a sharper curiosity. People stopped on the sidewalks. Men in suits paused their conversations to stare. Ginny sat high on the seat. She wore her mended gray dress and a hat she had fashioned from straw. But she did not hunch. She looked straight ahead, her chin lifted. She had learned, somewhere between the fire and the lawsuit, that shrinking only made the wolves bite harder. They entered the courthouse. The air inside was cool and smelled of floor wax and stale tobacco. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread. The giant bride case, the cattle war, the scandal. It was theater for the bored townsfolk. Silas Whitmore sat at the plaintiff's table, looking bored and immaculate in a charcoal suit. Beside him sat a lawyer from the Capitol, a man with slicked hair and a smile like a razor cut. On the other side sat Braddock. He wore a checkered suit that was too loud for a courtroom, and he was preening for the gallery, waving to people he didn't know. Eli and Ginny took their seats at the defense table. They had no lawyer. They had their stack of papers and each other. Judge Holloway was a man carved from granite, with a beard that reached his chest and eyes that had seen every lie the territory could produce. He banged his gavel, a sound like a gunshot. "This court is in session," the judge boomed. "We will hear the petition of Mr. Braddock regarding the contract of Miss Ingrid Larson and the counterclaims of harassment and fraud." Braddock's lawyer rose first. He was a small, frantic man who paced the floor. "Your Honor," the lawyer began, gesturing to Braddock, "my client is a businessman. He invested thousands of dollars in the defendant. He took a raw, uneducated girl from poverty and turned her into a star. He fed her, clothed her, and gave her a career. And how did she repay him? Theft. She stole the costume she wore. She stole the earnings of her final week. And she fled in breach of a signed 5-year contract." The lawyer turned to point a finger at Ginny. "Look at her, Your Honor. She is physically imposing. She is capable of great violence. My client fears for his safety. He asserts that she is unstable, immoral, and dangerous to the community. He only seeks to have her returned to his custody to fulfill her legal obligations." The gallery murmured. People craned their necks to look at Ginny's hands, at the breadth of her shoulders. "Miss Larson," the judge said, looking over his spectacles. "Or Mrs. Mercer, as the paperwork claims. Do you have a response?" Ginny stood up. The chair scraped loudly on the wood floor. When she stood to her full height, a hush fell over the room. She was taller than the bailiff, taller than the lawyer. She walked to the railing. She did not shout. She spoke with a controlled, quiet honesty that carried to the back of the room. "I am not uneducated, Your Honor," Ginny said. "I kept Mr. Braddock's books for 3 years because he could not do the arithmetic of his own cheating." She turned to face Braddock. "He did not make me a star. He made me a curiosity. He put me in a cage of velvet and charged people 10 cents to poke me with sticks. The contract he speaks of was signed by my mother when I was 14. It expired 3 years ago, but he added expenses to the ledger every time I asked for my freedom. He charged me for the air I breathed. She looked up at the judge. I am big, Your Honor. I cannot hide that. But my size does not make me dangerous. It makes me a target. I did not steal his money. I left with the clothes on my back and the dignity he tried to take from me. I am not property. I am a woman. The room was silent. Then it was Eli's turn. Whitmore's lawyer tried to shred him. Mr. Mercer, the lawyer sneered. You are known to be a violent man. A killer, some say. Is it not true that you hold this woman against her will? That you took advantage of her desperation to secure a laborer for your failing ranch? Eli stood. He gripped the railing. I am a violent man when I have to be, Eli said plainly. I have killed to stay alive. I do not boast of it, but I do not hold Jenny Larson. She came to my door in a storm because of a lie your client paid for. He pointed at Whitmore. He ordered a bride sent to me as a joke, a distraction. But the joke failed. I did not find a monster. I found a partner. Eli looked at Ginny. She is my wife. I chose her, not because she can pull a plow, but because she is the only person who ever looked at me and saw a man worth saving. She is my equal, and I will not let anyone put a chain on her again. The judge frowned, scribbling notes. This is a lot of emotion. Mr. Mercer, do you have evidence of this conspiracy? I do, a voice said from the back. Deputy Cal Harlan walked down the aisle. He was in uniform, but he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Deputy, the judge asked. I am sworn to uphold the law, Cal said, taking the stand, even when it is inconvenient. Cal laid a ledger on the judge's bench. This is the telegraph log from the station in town. It shows 3 wires sent from Silas Whitmore to the matrimonial agency in Chicago. It gives specific instructions to find a freak of nature and ship her to Eli Mercer to break his spirit. Whitmore jumped up. This is absurd. That man is a drunk. Sit down, Mr. Whitmore, the judge barked. I have more, Cal said. He looked at the door. Bring him in. The bailiff opened the door. Halloway, the stagecoach driver from the first day, walked in. He twisted his hat in his hands. State your name. The judge said, Halloway, sir. The driver mumbled. I drive the overland route. Tell the court what happened on December 12th. Halloway looked at Whitmore, then at the floor. I was paid $50 extra by that man there, Boyd. He told me to drop the lady at the Mercer gate. He said to make sure it was snowing. He said, let her freeze a little. It will make for a better show. A gasp went through the room. The cruelty of it, the calculated, cold-blooded intent, hung in the air. Whitmore's lawyer was on his feet, objecting, shouting about hearsay, but the damage was done. The judge slammed his gavel. Enough, the judge looked at Braddock. Mr. Braddock, your contract is a piece of fiction. It is coercive, it is expired, and it is void. If you approach Mrs. Mercer again, I will have you jailed for harassment. Get out of my courtroom. Braddock turned purple. He gathered his papers and stormed out, the crowd parting to let him pass. As for the eviction, the judge turned his eyes to Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore, these allegations of conspiracy are grave. However, the land title is a separate matter of survey lines. I cannot rule on the deed today without a federal surveyor's report. But the eviction stands. Whitmore's lawyer pressed. The eviction is stayed. The judge ruled. Pending a full review of the boundary lines, Mr. Mercer, you keep your land for now. But this court advises you to find proof of your claim before the surveyor arrives in the spring. It was a partial victory. Ginny was free. The land was safe for a few months. But as they walked out of the courthouse, Eli saw Whitmore standing by his carriage. Whitmore wasn't angry. He was smiling, that same cold, snake-like smile. Enjoy the winter, Eli, Whitmore called out. It is a long season. Accidents happen. They returned to the ranch with a sense of dread mixed with their relief. The law had given them a shield, but a shield was not a wall. Whitmore did not wait for the surveyor. He answered the law with force. 3 nights after their return, the moon was hidden behind heavy clouds. The wind was howling, masking the sound of hoofbeats. Eli and Ginny were sleeping in the lean-to they had built against the root cellar. Eli woke to a sound that was deeper than the wind, a low, rumbling vibration in the earth. "Ginny," he hissed, shaking her awake. "Cattle!" They grabbed their coats and rifles and ran out into the dark. The herd, which they had painstakingly gathered back into the repaired corral, was in a panic. Riders with torches were galloping along the fence line, whooping and firing guns into the air. "They are stampeding them!" Eli shouted. The gate burst open, the woods shattering under the weight of 50 terrified steers. The cattle poured out, blind with fear, running straight for the dark mouth of the canyon. "If they go into the canyon, they will break their legs in the dark!" Ginny yelled. "We have to turn them!" They ran for the horses. They didn't bother with saddles. They swung up bareback, grabbing handfuls of mane. It was a ride into madness. The night was a blur of shadows and torchlight. The cattle were a thundering river of dark shapes. Eli rode hard on the left flank, firing his pistol into the ground to try and steer the leaders. Ginny rode on the right. She was a shadow in the dark, her long body melding with the horse. She didn't have a gun. She had a coiled rope. She swung the lasso, the loop catching a torch-wielding rider who was driving the herd toward the cliff edge. She yanked hard. The man flew from his saddle with a scream, hitting the dirt. "Turn them north," Eli roared. They worked as a single organism. Eli blocked the canyon entrance with his horse, risking death as the herd bore down on him. Ginny drove the flank, shouting, slapping her hat against her leg. Turning the lead steer, the herd slowed, confused, milling in a tight circle near the creek bed. The rustlers, seeing the stampede fail and their man down, wheeled their horses and fled into the night. Eli slid from his horse. His legs gave out, and he sat hard in the dirt. He was gasping for air, his chest burning. Ginny dropped down beside him. She was covered in mud, her hair wild, her eyes wide and fierce. "We lost 10 head, she said, breathless. "Maybe 15. "But we saved the rest," Eli said. He looked at her. In the chaos, in the dirt, she was magnificent. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she said. She reached out and grabbed his coat, pulling him toward her. "We are alive, Eli. We are alive." They clung to each other right there in the mud, surrounded by the heavy breathing of the cattle. The adrenaline crashed into exhaustion, leaving them shaken and raw. "I promise you," Eli whispered against her neck, "I will build you a house of stone. I will build walls so thick no fire can burn them. I will make this place safe." "You are the safe place," Ginny said. "You and me, that is the house." She pulled back to look at him. "I vow to you, Eli Mercer, I will not run again. I will stand in the fire with you. And I vow to you," Eli said, his voice thick, "I will never let you stand alone." It was a wedding ceremony more real than the one in the church. No parson, no Bible, just 2 people binding their souls together in the wreckage of a stampede. Morning brought the cold light of assessment. They rode through the scrub, gathering the strays. In a narrow arroyo a mile from the ranch, they found one of the steers that had been lost in the night. It was dead, its leg broken in a fall. But as Eli knelt to check the animal, he saw something. "Ginny," he called. "Look at this." He pointed to the flank of the dead steer. The brand was fresh. It was Eli's brand, the Bar M, but it had been altered. A hot iron had been used to draw lines over the existing scar, turning the M into a crude W. It was a running iron job. Sloppy. Done in haste. They were not just stampeding them, Eli said, touching the burnt hide. They were rebranding them to steal them. This animal. This is proof. Proof of what? Ginny asked. This is not a registered brand, Eli said. But look here. He spat on his finger and rubbed the soot away. The iron slipped. See that jagged mark at the bottom? That is a flaw in the branding iron, a chip in the metal. He looked up, his eyes hard. I saw Boyd shoeing a horse last month. He was using a running iron to heat the shoe. It had a chip in the handle loop. Just like this. It links Whitmore's foreman to cattle rustling, Ginny said. It is a felony. It is the rope we need to hang them, Eli said. They cut the patch of hide from the steer, rolling it up and salting it to preserve the evidence. That afternoon, they did not go to town. They went to their neighbors. They rode to the shack of Mateo, the vaquero. They showed him the hide. I know this iron, Mateo said, tracing the mark. I have seen Boyd carrying it. Will you testify? Ginny asked. If we bring the marshal? Mateo looked at his shack, then at the mountains. I am an old man. I have lived with my head down. But a man who steals cattle, that is a sin against the land? Yes, I will speak. They went to the Widow Gable. She listened, serving them tea in chipped cups. Whitmore poisoned my husband's dog to make us sell, she said, her voice trembling with old anger. I have kept quiet because I am alone, but if you stand, I will stand. They went to the Miller place. The boy who had run from Ginny weeks ago opened the door. His father, a hard-bitten man named Frank, looked at the hide. Whitmore squeezed me on the grain prices last year. Frank spat. Tried to starve me out. I saw his riders driving your stock last night. Mercer, I didn't interfere because I have kids. But this, he touched the brand. This is thievery. A man can't abide that. A coalition was forming. It was fragile, held together by shared grievances and the sudden realization that the monster wasn't the giant woman in the wagon, but the man in the mansion on the hill. They returned to the root cellar as the sun went down. They had the evidence. They had the witnesses. They had the law on their side, if they could get to it. But Eli knew Whitmore. He knew that legal papers moved slow, and bullets moved fast. If they waited for the marshal to ride from the Capitol, Whitmore would burn the rest of the valley down to cover his tracks. Eli sat cleaning his revolver. He spun the cylinder. It clicked rhythmically. We cannot wait for the circuit court, Eli said. What are you saying? Ginny asked. She was melting snow for water over the fire. Whitmore knows we survived the night. He knows his men failed. He will not send rustlers next time. He will come himself, with everything he has. Eli stood up. He holstered the gun. I am going to him, Eli said. Ginny stood up, blocking his path. No, you are not going to duel him. That is suicide. Not a duel, Eli said. I am not going to meet him in the street at high noon. I am going to his ranch. I am going to walk through his front door with this piece of hide and the sworn statements of our neighbors. He will kill you on the porch, Ginny said. No, Eli said, because I am not going alone. We are all going, me, you, Mateo, Frank Miller, the widow. We are going to ride up his driveway in broad daylight. We are going to show him that he doesn't own the valley anymore. He looked at Ginny. He relies on fear. He relies on us being separated, hiding in our holes. If we show up as a force, if we demand accountability to his face, he cracks. I saw it in the courtroom. When the light shines on him, he shrinks. Ginny looked at him. She saw the change in him. The lonely, broken man who had lived in a dead house was gone. In his place was a leader. It is a gamble, she said. It is the only hand we have left, Eli said. Ginny nodded slowly. She reached for her coat. Then we ride at dawn, she said. And we make him look us in the eye. The dawn of the appointed day did not bring the sun. It brought a sky the color of a bruised plum and a wind that cut through wool coats like a freshly sharpened knife. The West was not interested in providing a dramatic backdrop for justice. It only offered the same brutal indifference it gave to the wolves and the sagebrush. Eli Mercer stood by the blackened ruins of his barn. The smell of wet ash still lingered, mixed now with the scent of coffee boiling on a camp stove. He checked the cylinder of his Colt Navy for the third time. Stop checking, Ginny said. She was standing beside the wagon, tightening the cinch on the bay mare. She wore her gray coat, patched at the shoulder where it had torn during the stampede. She looked tired, her eyes rimmed with red. but her hands were steady. "It is a habit," Eli said, sliding the gun back into leather. "Whitmore will bring men. He always brings men. And we are bringing the truth," Ginny said. "It has to be enough." They were setting a trap, but it was not a trap of pits and spikes. It was a trap built of paper, witnesses, and the fragile spine of the law. They had sent word to Whitmore that they were ready to discuss the surrender of the deed, a meeting to be held at the property line where the county road met the ranch access. It was public ground, neutral ground. But they had also sent a telegram to the United States Marshal in the capital, alerting him to the rustling ring operating out of the valley, and they had gathered their neighbors. By mid-morning, the wind was howling, kicking up dust devils that danced across the frozen ground. The coalition arrived in dribs and drabs. Mateo, the old vaquero, sat on his mule, wrapped in a serape, his face hidden beneath the brim of his sombrero. The widow Gable arrived in her small buggy, a shotgun resting across her knees under a quilt. Frank Miller and his son rode up on plow horses, looking grim and terrified. And then the law arrived. Marshal Davis was a man who looked like he had been carved out of oak and left out in the rain too long. He rode a tall black gelding and carried a Winchester rifle in a scabbard. Beside him rode Deputy Cal Harlan, looking pale but resolute, his badge pinned to a clean coat. "This is a dangerous game, Mercer," Marshal Davis said, looking at the gathering. "If you are wrong about the brand, or if these witnesses turn tail, I cannot protect you from a civil eviction." "I am not wrong," Eli said. He patted the saddlebag where the salted hide was stored. "And they will not turn." They waited at the crossroads. The wind bit at their faces. Ginny stood next to the wagon, refusing to sit. She was a pillar in the landscape, a landmark of defiance. At noon, the dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Silas Whitmore did not ride. He arrived in a carriage with varnished wood sides and leather seats, pulled by 2 matching grays. He was flanked by 6 outriders, hard men with rifles resting on their thighs. Among them was Boyd, the foreman with the scarred chin, and sitting beside Whitmore in the carriage, looking like a vulture in a checkered suit, was Braddock. The carriage pulled up 10 yards from Eli's group. The outriders fanned out, their horses prancing nervously in the wind. Whitmore stepped down. He wore a heavy fur coat and polished boots that had never touched manure. He looked at the gathered neighbors, the widow, the Mexican, the dirt farmer, with a sneer of amusement. "Quite a reception, committee," Whitmore shouted over the wind. "I expected you to be packing crates. Eli, not hosting a social." He walked forward, peeling off his gloves. Braddock scrambled down after him, clutching his bowler hat to his head. "We are here to finalize the transfer," Whitmore said, stopping a safe distance away. "You have the deed ready to sign?" "I have something else," Eli said. Braddock stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Ginny. He ignored the men, he ignored the guns. He saw only the asset he had lost. "Look at you," Braddock scoffed, walking toward her. "Standing in the dirt, dressed like a beggar. Is this the life you chose? Ingrid, shoveling dung and freezing in a shack?" Ginny did not flinch. She looked down at him. "It is a life that belongs to me, Mr. Braddock." "You belong to the public," Braddock shouted, his voice shrill. "You are a freak of nature. You belong on a stage where people can see what God got wrong." He was trying to break her. He was trying to provoke the monster he had sold tickets for. He wanted her to scream, to strike him, to prove to the marshal watching from the shadows of the wagon that she was violent and unstable. Ginny's hands curled into fists at her sides. Eli took a step forward, his hand twitching toward his gun, but Ginny shot him a glance. "Stay back." She took a deep breath, inhaling the cold, clean air of the high plains. She released her fists. She relaxed her shoulders. "I am a person," Ginny said, her voice calm and devastatingly controlled. "And you are a small man making a lot of noise. I am done listening to you." She turned her back on him. It was a dismissal more powerful than a blow. Braddock turned purple, sputtering, impotent against her refusal to be his victim. Whitmore laughed. Touching, truly, but I am a busy man. The deed, Eli, or the sheriff removes you. The sheriff is not here, Eli said. But the marshal is. Marshal Davis stepped out from behind the canvas of the wagon. He held the Winchester loose in one hand. Whitmore stiffened. The smile slipped for a fraction of a second. Marshal Davis, Whitmore said, recovering his oil-slick charm. A pleasure. I assume you are here to enforce the eviction. I am here to investigate a felony, Davis said, rustling, altering brands, and arson. Ridiculous, Whitmore said. These peasants have been telling tales. This is not a tale, Eli said. He pulled the roll of hide from his saddlebag and threw it on the ground between them. It unrolled, revealing the scarred, burnt mark where the bar M had been twisted into a double W. We found this on a dead steer after your men stampeded my herd, Eli said. And we have a sworn statement from Mateo that he saw Boyd using a chipped running iron. The same chip that made that mark. Boyd, sitting on his horse, went for his gun. Don't! Cal Harlan shouted, drawing his own pistol. The standoff froze the air. Hands hovered over weapons. The wind whistled through the spokes of the wagon wheels. This is circumstantial, Whitmore said, his voice hard. You cannot prove I ordered anything. Boyd is a free agent. I have the telegrams. Silas, Cal said, stepping forward. The ones you sent to Chicago, ordering the bride. The ones you sent to Braddock offering to pay his legal fees if he dragged Ginny away. And I have the testimony of the men you hired to burn the barn. We picked them up in Red Rock yesterday. Whitmore looked at Cal. You ungrateful little rat. I bought that badge for you. And I am giving it back, Cal said, unpinning the star and holding it in his hand. Right after I put you in a cell. Whitmore looked at the marshal, then at the neighbors standing firm with their shotguns and pitchforks. He realized, perhaps for the first time in his life, that fear had stopped working, so he tried the only other thing he knew. Marshal, Whitmore said, lowering his voice, stepping closer. Let us be reasonable. These are poor people. They are confused. I am a pillar of this territory. Surely a man of your standing understands that mistakes happen. I could make a very generous donation to the Marshal's Widow and Orphan Fund. Say, $5,000? To make this hide disappear? The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Marshal Davis looked at Whitmore. He spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the frozen boot of the cattle baron. That is bribery of a federal officer, Davis said. Add it to the list. Boys, take him. It fell apart in a second. Boyd roared and spurred his horse, drawing his pistol. Not me. I am not hanging for him. He fired. The shot went wild, hitting the dirt near the Widow Gable's buggy. Down! Eli tackled Ginny, driving her to the ground behind the wagon wheel. Gunfire erupted. It was not the clean, rhythmic popping of a target range. It was a chaotic, deafening roar. The marshal's rifle cracked. Mateo fired a rusty pistol from the back of his mule. Whitmore's men were confused. Some fired back, others, seeing the marshal, wheeled their horses to run. Eli peered over the rim of the wheel. He saw Boyd taking aim at the marshal, who was exposed. Eli drew his Colt. He didn't think about the past. He didn't think about the man on the ridge. He thought about the future. He breathed out. He squeezed. The bullet struck Boyd's shoulder. The foreman spun in the saddle and fell hard to the ground, his gun flying away. Cease fire, Davis bellowed. Drop them or die. The outriders threw their guns down. The fight had gone out of them when Boyd fell, but in the chaos, Braddock had moved. He had scrambled toward the carriage, grabbing a pistol from the seat where Whitmore kept it. He wasn't aiming at the lawmen. He was aiming at Ginny, who was rising from the dirt. If I cannot have you, no one does, Braddock screamed. Eli was too far. He couldn't turn in time, but Cal Harlan was there. The deputy threw himself across the gap, shoving Ginny aside just as Braddock fired. Cal grunted and stumbled back, clutching his thigh. Marshal Davis swung his rifle butt, catching Braddock squarely in the jaw. The showman crumpled like a paper doll. Silence rushed back into the void, ringing in their ears. Whitmore stood alone in the center of the road. His men were down or disarmed. His bribery had failed. His foreman was bleeding in the dirt. Marshal Davis walked up to him. He didn't say a word. He spun Whitmore around and clamped the irons onto his wrists. "You are making a mistake," Whitmore hissed, but his voice was trembling. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Davis said. "You are a rustler and a thief. Get in the wagon." Eli ran to Cal. The deputy was sitting on the ground, gripping his leg. Blood was seeping through his fingers. "Cal," Eli said, kneeling. "I am all right." Cal gasped, his face gray. "Through and through. Just missed the bone." Ginny was there a second later, tearing a strip from her petticoat, the second time she had done so to bind a wound in this war. She tied the tourniquet with efficient, gentle hands. "You saved me," Ginny said, looking at Cal. "I owed you," Cal whispered. "I watched them treat you like an animal for weeks. I owed you." The aftermath was a slow exhalation. Whitmore was hauled away to the federal jail in the capital. His empire, built on intimidation and debt, crumbled within days as creditors and victims descended on the estate. Braddock was dragged before the circuit judge. He was slapped with a restraining order so severe that if he set foot within 100 miles of Ginny Larson, he would serve 5 years hard labor. He was put on the first train east, nursing a broken jaw and a ruined reputation. Justice was not perfect. The legal battles over the land continued for months. Whitmore's lawyers fought like cornered rats, but the eviction was dead. The rustling ring was broken. The air in the valley changed. It was no longer thick with fear. Back at the Mercer Ranch, the real work began. It was spring now. The snow had retreated to the high peaks, leaving the valley floor a lush, impossible green. Eli and Ginny worked from dawn until dusk. They cleared the charred wreckage of the barn. They cut timber from the high ridge, dragging the logs down with the team. They built a new house. It was not like the old one. "Make the door higher," Eli said, measuring the frame. 7 feet. "That is a waste of wood," Ginny argued, holding the plumb line. "I am not having you duck in your own home." Eli said, "And the counters, we are raising them 4 inches, so you do not hurt your back." Ginny looked at him. She touched the frame of the door. He was rebuilding the world to fit her. He was carving out a space where she did not have to shrink. "Thank you," she whispered. "Hammer," Eli said, holding out his hand. They planted a garden near the creek, which flowed clear and strong now that the dam was gone. Potatoes, squash, and rows of hardy beans. But the scars were there. Sometimes, when a rider passed on the road, Ginny would freeze, her shoulders hunching. She still feared that this was a dream, that the cage was waiting. One evening, Ginny sat on the porch step, looking at her hands. They were rougher than ever, stained with soil and sap. "I look like a farmhand," she said quietly. "My mother wanted me to be a lady. She wanted me to play the piano." Eli sat beside her. He took her hand. It engulfed his. "You are a lady," Eli said. "You are the lady of this ranch. And these hands," he kissed her palm, then her wrist, then the calluses on her fingers. "These hands built a wall against the wind. Piano hands could not do that." "I am still too big," she said, the old shame leaking out. "I take up too much space." "You take up exactly the space you are supposed to," Eli said. "The mountains are big. The sky is big. Why should you be small?" He stood up and pulled her to her feet. "Come with me." He led her up the ridge, past the grazing cattle, to the small stone enclosure where the white cross stood. Eli took off his hat. The wind ruffled his hair, which was showing more gray these days. "Thomas," Eli said aloud. It was the first time Ginny had heard him speak his brother's name to the air. "This is Ginny," Eli said to the grave. "She is my wife. She saved the ranch. She saved me." He looked at the stone. "I have been angry for a long time. I have been holding on to this hill like it was a grudge, but we are building something new now. I just wanted you to know." He put his arm around Ginny's waist. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. She didn't feel like a replacement for his grief. She felt like the foundation for what came next. He would have liked you, Eli said. He liked things that were strong. In June, they hosted the gathering. It wasn't a party. It was a work day. The neighbors came, Mateo, the widow, the Millers, and even the new deputy. A young man Cal Harlan was training while his leg healed. They came to help raise the roof beam of the new barn. There were no speeches. There was no grand declaring of friendship. There was just the sound of hammers, the smell of sawdust, and the passing of water dippers. At noon, they ate at long tables set up in the yard. Jenny had cooked for 2 days, stews, breads, pies. She moved among the neighbors, pouring coffee. She was head and shoulders above every man there. But no one stared. No one whispered. Frank Miller looked up as she filled his cup. "Thank you, Mrs. Mercer. That is fine pie." "Thank you, Mr. Miller," Jenny said. "Call me Frank." He said, it was a small thing. A name, a nod. But it was acceptance. It was the community acknowledging that she was not a spectacle to be gawked at, but a neighbor to be respected. She had bled with them. She had fought for them. She belonged. That night, after the last wagon had rolled away and the stars had come out, the ranch was quiet. The new house smelled of pine resin and beeswax. The fire crackled in the hearth. Eli locked the door. It was a 7-foot door, solid and heavy. He turned to Ginny. She was standing by the bed, wearing a white cotton nightdress she had sewn herself. It was simple, unadorned, but it flowed around her form like water. She looked nervous. The trauma of the past, the memories of men who wanted to own her, still lingered in the corners of her mind. Eli walked over to her. He didn't touch her yet. He stood close enough to feel her warmth. "Ginny," he said. She looked down at him. Her eyes were wide, searching his face. "Do you remember the first night?" Eli asked. "You asked me where you should undress." Ginny nodded. "I was terrified. I thought you would look at me like I was a prize pig. I told you to do it in front of me," Eli said, "because I was thinking about the cold." "I know," she said. "I am not thinking about the cold now," Eli said softly. He reached up and unbuttoned his shirt. He tossed it onto the chair. He stepped closer, until his chest brushed against the cotton of her gown. "Where should I undress?" Eli asked her. The question hung in the air. A reversal of the power. A surrender of his own vulnerability. Ginny smiled. It was a slow, dawning smile that lit up the room. "Right in front of me," she whispered. She reached out and touched his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "Because the fire is here." They came together not with the frantic desperation of survival, but with the slow, deliberate rhythm of peace. There was no audience, no crowd, no manager. Just a man and a woman who had seen the worst of the world and chosen the best of each other. Outside, the Wyoming landscape stretched out, wide and indifferent, a vast ocean of sage and stone that didn't care if a man lived or died. But inside the house, the lamp burned steady and gold. 2 scarred people held each other in the dark, safe in the knowledge that they had built a love strong enough to outlast the West. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the dust and snow of the American frontier, and I hope you felt every mile of the road alongside Eli and Ginny. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below sharing your location. It is always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale of resilience and romance, please consider subscribing to the From Wild West channel so you never miss an adventure. I also invite you to share your thoughts on the ending in English in the comments section. Did Ginny and Eli's journey resonate with you? Until next time, keep your fences mended and your powder dry.